Welcome to the show, everybody. Good to be with you. Recently, I was interviewed by a man named Daniel from a Swedish news station called KLA-TV. Daniel has actually interviewed quite a lot of people, some of them famous, like RFK Jr., and his interviews have over 11 million views. So he's done quite a lot of work, and I was very pleased to chat with him. He was in my neck of the woods in Arizona recently for, I think, a conference or something that he was helping to work with, and one of his friends had sent him a video. I think it was my Why the Jews Aren't God's Chosen People video, and he saw that and he wanted to interview me. So he was in Arizona. I'm in Arizona, obviously, and we met up to do an interview. So I'm pretty thrilled to share it with you. It was a great interview. We covered a lot of interesting topics. So things like the Bible, the end times, Zionism, obviously that's a very hot topic right now, dispensationalism, and even things like the nature of salvation, history, the Sabbath. We really ran the gamut, so to speak, of topics. But nevertheless, I hope that you enjoy this interview. I hope it edifies you. I hope you also share it with your friends, because there's a topic in there for somebody. If you want to stay in touch with Daniel, you can find him on Substack, and I'll put the information in the description of this video. But his handle is at DW Shumway. It's spelled DWSHUMWAY. So with that, onward we go, and let's check out the interview.
Here we are in Phoenix, Arizona with Tudor Alexander. Tudor, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Good. And we're here with Josh from Germany, and I'm Dan from Montana via Japan and I guess you could say Seattle. So let's begin. Your name is Tudor Alexander.
Right.
Alexander, is that Greek? Are you Greek?
No, I'm Romanian, actually.
Okay.
My dad's name is Alex, so I took his middle name.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. And how did you get the name Tudor?
That's a good question. Well, I was born in Romania when it was communist. I was in 1984. And at that time, I don't know exactly what it was, but you had to declare the name of the child when the child was born.
Yes.
And supposedly my mom had this list of like Roman conqueror names that she wanted to name me, like Severus, or some of these strong general names or something. And my dad forgot the list. So one of his friends was like, "Oh, why don't you just name him Tudor?" I don't know. That name came up in a recent conversation, so that they just named me that. So it worked out, I guess. I didn't like my name when I was in elementary school very much because people made fun of me, as you can imagine. But now I really like my name. I think it's a very unique name.
Yeah.
Tudor is the name of a house. It's the name of a dynasty. It's the name of a watch. And it comes from, there's several theories. It might come from Theodoric, which is Theodoros, which is gift of God, or Tutorix, which is a Celtic name.
Oh.
And that means people's king. So
I
don't know which one it comes from.
Yeah.
In Romania, it's more of a surname than it is a first name, but it's not an uncommon name. There are people named. We have actually a family friend whose last name is Tudor. Mm-hmm. Their last name is Tudor. Right. So that's interesting. I don't know how it got to Romania, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But there you go. So
the only other historical famous Romanian names that I know about are, Dracula.
Right. Yeah.
And wasn't Vlad the Impaler a Romanian, or was he?
He was. Yeah. He's a Romanian hero. People look up to Vlad because he was, obviously people know him from Bram Stoker's story, but Vlad the Impaler historically was a very important figure for Romania because of his defense against the Turks.
Right.
He obviously had some very gruesome methods.
Yes.
And so, but people historically in Romania look back at Vlad as a hero, as a country hero, as a national hero. So
would his name also be common in Romania?
Vlad is a common first name. It's also I've heard it as a last name too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we do have Russian influence, obviously, especially with communism, and
yes,
a lot of people think Romania is Slavic, but it's not. That was a propaganda move by the Soviet Union when they took over, and they changed Romania to Romania with a U to disassociate it from Rome in the West. But Romania is actually, the Romanian language is the closest to Italian out of all of the Romance languages.
Is that right?
Okay.
Romania means little Rome,
Mhm.
because the Romans had a very hard time conquering the Dacian barbarians there. And so I think they had like a whole outpost. They spent many years trying to conquer these people. And so Romania, Romanian is very tied to Rome, obviously the Roman Empire, and having been conquered by them. So
Were the Romans in that area for a long time?
I think so. I'm not that familiar with the history, but from what I've known and heard, they had a harder than usual time conquering that particular
Yeah.
part. And so they called it Romania, which is like little Rome. You know?
Yep.
And so, yeah, Romanian is a Latin language. When I studied Spanish in school, it was so easy to do Spanish because practically speaking fluently Romanian. So, yeah.
So you're trilingual.
I was, I used to speak Spanish pretty well, but
Yeah.
I haven't had a reason to practice it. So I still know my Spanish. I can still pronounce things pretty well, but
Yep.
I haven't had the chance to converse in it.
Right.
So,
Right.
but I used to. I worked for the government, believe it or not. After college, I worked for Social Security doing disability claims for not the retirement disability, but for people like SSRI, the people, or not SSRI, SSI. SSRIs are a type of drug. SSIs, it's the welfare program of the Social Security Administration.
Uh-huh.
So I was doing welfare claims through that and speaking to a lot of Spanish people because we're here in Arizona.
Yeah.
And so that was a way that I was practicing my Spanish quite a bit, and I got pretty decent at it. But ever since then, I haven't had to practice. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
So I noticed a friend of mine in Montana introduced me to your work. And I'm blown away by the amount of content you have.
Yeah.
When I start looking through your playlists, and then I see a video that's 4 hours long, then a 3 hour, then a 7 hour. You have some short ones too. And I just run the numbers in my head. And I know from working with Josh and my team at KLA in Frankfurt,
Yeah.
how much goes into just producing a 20-minute
Oh,
video.
for sure. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a
I
lot
mean,
of work.
where do you get the time? Or do you have a team, or are you using
No.
AI, or what's going on?
I haven't used AI. No, not really. I don't have a team. It's just me. I don't have dogs. I'm not married. I
Yeah.
don't have any responsibilities as far as that goes. So I've had time to just focus on one thing.
Yep.
And in the last 3 years, right now I'm just about to start recording my final big series, which is on salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be 40 episodes. So I'm going to be recording 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then mastering on the off days and so on. So it's going to be pretty packed. But I want to schedule that out all the way through May. And then once that's done, I'll be able to offer my whole library on a USB.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably going to be, because I have a tally that I've counted to see how much content do I actually have. It's been around, by the time I'm done with this series, I think it's going to be about 700 or more hours of content. And that's in 3 years that I've produced, on top of releasing a 650-page devotional, rewriting my book on the gratitude map. I added about 20,000 words to that, published it, re-recorded the audiobook, published that. And then now, as of today, I'm releasing my 800-page nutrition book that I rewrote because I kind of redid it. My original version was in 2020 and had a bunch of like new age stuff. So
Yeah.
I've been wanting to do that for a while and just haven't had the time. But yeah, it's been a busy couple of years, that's for sure.
And okay, you talked about working for the government before. What got you into being full-time into truth telling and spreading information?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people maybe could relate to the fact that in 2020, when everything happened, you kind of started to have to make a choice, right? You had to make a choice between, do I want to go along with the narrative that's being presented to me, or do I want to speak up about it? Of course, it started with the masks and all the nonsense that, there, and that created a ton of arguments. Are you going to wear a mask? How come you're not wearing a mask? That kind of stuff. And I think that's how it started for me, obviously, because that affected every aspect of my life. In my case, I was teaching ballroom dancing still full time, doing professional and competing and everything. And so you can imagine that when you're told to lock down and wear a mask and stuff, when you have an appointment business that's dependent on physical contact,
kills it.
It kills it overnight, So that was, that really frustrated me a lot. And some of the things that I was doing, like I did this event called the Dancing with the Stars for the Kidney Foundation here in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And they would do like a yearly fundraiser, and it was a big deal. And local professionals, you would get a student that was usually wealthy, obviously, because they have to get lessons. And you train them for 6 months. It was like Dancing with the Stars, except just local. So I did that for several years. And then they started requiring you to like have a vaccine. I'm like, I'm not doing that. You're not insuring me. You're not giving me any money. In terms of like, what if I get a vaccine and I get disabled or something? Are you going to cover that? So why are you requiring something from me that is experimental? So then that was like, all right, so that really pissed me off, to be honest with you. So it kind of motivated me to, just start speaking the truth. And I started looking into vaccines actually, because I didn't know that much about vaccines. I thought they were like, I knew there was like some, corruption with them, but I didn't know as much as I know now about it. So I saw this documentary called The Truth About Vaccines by, what's their name? I forget their name, but they also did one titled The Truth About Cancer. They're like big Trump supporters. I don't know now with the whole Epstein thing if they still are, but they were big Trump supporters. Anyway, they had that whole documentary. It was a good documentary on vaccines, very good documentary on the history of all these vaccines and how they've just been nothing but fakery throughout time. And that really kind of motivated me to be interested in that. And obviously that was an ongoing conversation. And for the year after 2020, from 2020 to 2021, I was just going into rabbit hole after rabbit hole because I was on unemployment.
Yep.
Right. And I had time. And of course, that's what you do. You go looking on the internet. And so I just was learning so much in that time about just a lot of topics, from the shape of the earth to the vaccines to conspiracies to all kinds of stuff. And so around 2021, I was motivated to write a book on that. And of course, when you're an author and you write books, usually the books are writing you too. Like every time I've committed to a book, God sends experiences my way that force me to really live what I'm writing about. Let's put it that way, So books are a very transformational experience if you've ever written a book. And so this book that I was writing, I wanted to talk about the deception that I was starting to see at that time in 2021, which was still pretty fresh at that time, which is this idea of this dualistic situation. You have the right versus the left, the nationalists versus the communists, the people who are promising you to save you from the big bad boogeyman of the WHO and stuff like that, and they're actually part of the same network. So I was starting to see that the dark versus light in 2021, and I was writing this book, and I also during that time I was researching all of these hot topics. Somehow I don't remember how I just started to research the life of Christ and to realize that there's so much evidence for the resurrection, for Jesus being who he said he was. And I grew up Eastern Orthodox. I was very religious. It's not like I was ever an atheist, but that time in 2021, a lot of things intersected for me where I was researching a lot of things. And for the first time, I really got the idea that, okay, like Jesus is real. Like he's actually historically real. Like there's a lot of evidence. And if he's real, then what does that mean? The things that he said must be true. And it's just led to this whole, transformative moment. And it was just at the same time, I had lost everything. And you can read about that in my testimony, getting scammed, out of a ton of money. My health was, spiraling out of control because of various reasons. So it was just like rock bottom,
I was going to ask, did you hit a rock bottom moment?
Yeah, I hit a rock bottom. One of my friends, Ruben, he has a great saying. He says, when you hit rock bottom, that God is that rock at the bottom, and so God meets us in the valleys of life. He's not on the hills, he's not on the mountains. He's in the valleys with you. And that was a very important year for me because 2021 is when everything kind of collapsed and my identity was broken down. My direction was totally changed because of the research that I was doing, because of my health, because of my finances being lost, and everything. It just kind of perfect storm. And then all that was left was Jesus there. And that was a very humbling moment. I had to declare bankruptcy. I I had, in 2020, I had moved in with my parents because actually a little bit earlier than that, my previous job when I was working for the dance studio that I was working at, I was there for like 7 years. Mm-hmm. The guy ended up being a snake and he threatened to sue me because I quit, even though he asked me to give a 6-month notice. So I gave my notice, and then within a month, he started, it's this and that, and he basically fired me. And so after that, there were rumors about my, what I was doing, and my students kind of quit. So I lost like a ton of business through this whole debacle.
Yeah.
And then he was sending me a letter to threaten to sue my pants off. And I know that he had sued people in the past and he was successful. And I sold everything. I moved in with my parents. I was hunkering down, ready to fight this thing. And of course, God freed me from that because he fired me. And in firing me, he basically voided his contract, which was I didn't know anything. When I went to that place, like when I was like 20, I don't even know, I was in my 20s. And you don't know anything about legal contracts and non-competes and all this kind of stuff. His non-compete was ridiculous. Like literally in 15-mile radius of his location, you couldn't do anything relatively close to the activity that you were doing, meaning you're basically screwed. I mean, you can't do anything. So anyway, I moved in with my parents, and then that didn't pan out. So thank God I didn't get sued. But so then I was like, okay, well, whatever. And then with all the Trump propaganda that was happening, I basically thought, oh gosh, Trump's going to win. He's going to take this system down and we're going to have a golden age, You
were one of those?
I was one of those, unfortunately, and because I didn't have discernment, it is what it is. And it is what it is, God uses all these things for the good. We all have to be deceived by something so that we can then, one thing that's important in pursuing your gifts is understanding that your wounds are your greatest gifts. The places that you get wounded are where you can minister to others the most. In my case, I was deceived by many things. I was deceived by worldly things. I was deceived by, transhumanism. When I first wrote my nutrition book, I wanted to hack my body and live forever so I could travel the stars. And I realized all those things are BS by now, So, but that's what I was deceived about. I was deceived by Trump. I was deceived by, various Ponzi schemes and money and all these things that I put my trust in.
Was there anything in your profession as a professional dancer that was deceptive, you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I was very much driven by recognition.
Yep.
And dancing, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. Dancing, competitive dancing, definitely plays to your desire for recognition.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful sport. Don't get me wrong. I love dancing. I still go dancing today. I still have my students that I work with just for fun, but competitive ballroom dancing is an incredibly addictive sport if you want recognition. Mm-hmm. If you want recognition, then you get to dress up, you got your shiny outfits, you go to you go, oh my gosh, you're schmoozing with all the top people there. And there's this pyramid that you can climb and you can be in the final. And it's a whole thing, And so, it really snares you in. And it took me banging my head against the wall many times to come to the realization, like, this is a total racket. What am I doing with my life? I've been doing this for like 10, 15 years, wasting my time, barking up the wrong tree. And, eventually it happened, but it took a while. It took, 15 years to figure that out and realize that one of my first mentors, he was a really interesting guy, but he's like, the dance world is like a big box of cereal. It's nothing but nuts, flakes, and fruits, I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's pretty much my experience. It's nothing but crazy people, and just everybody's so greedy and so insecure. And man, it's a dog-eat-dog world, I swear, because a lot of times what these owners will do, the franchise model has really screwed things over, because what these people do is they have a franchise system like Fred Astaire or Arthur Murray.
Yeah.
And they import high talent people. Yep. From Ukraine, from Russia, from Europe, whatever, that have been training for, all their life. But
these are people trained in traditional ballet or actual ballroom dancing.
They're dancing since they're, 5 years old.
Yeah.
And so they look good, they got talent, and now you as the owner of the franchise can say, look at me, we have the highest quality thing. You're paying these guys $20 an hour while you're charging $120 for a lesson.
Yes.
And they can't do anything because, you have them basically where you want them with the whatever H1 visa or whatever it is.
Yep.
And if they try to quit, then you can sue them, you can deport them, you can do whatever you want. So it's a real racket. And then if let's say you're a citizen, like I am a citizen, you have non-compete clauses. And it's just, this is what it is. Everybody's trying to get their own. It's such a shame. And that it's such a beautiful art form, but it's so full of vanity. And
yes.
the system is so corrupt. And the judges are owners of competitions and they're coaches.
Sure.
And it's just this, I used to go to these pro parties. My last partner, she was way younger than I was. She was a great dancer, but for her, the whole pro thing was like totally new. I'm like, listen, you'll understand what it's like, So we went to these pro parties, and you could just feel the sleaze, man. You could feel the sleaze because everybody's sitting there. There's literally like a live band playing at this pro party.
What does it mean, pro party?
Pro party is where all the pros go to hang out, and there's the judges, and it's like hors d'oeuvres, kind of the networking type of party.
Yep.
And it's just like, nothing tells you about this more when you go to a party like this. There's a nice band in the corner. There's like a nice Latin band, like live music.
Yeah.
Nobody's dancing. Nobody's dancing in a room of professional dancers. Everybody's all dressed to the nines.
Okay.
And smoking, and oh my gosh, what do you think about so and so? And what do you think about that? And it's just you want to take a shower when you get in after that room, So it's just those kind of things. I'm like, yeah, I'm done.
Pure vanity.
Pure vanity. And so, yeah, God gave me what I wanted in that system. I got to dance. I got to really push my body to the max. I was relatively successful with my last partner. I was, pretty good. We trained with the top people in the world. I did things and experienced things that very few people could say that they experienced. But it was at that point I realized when the journey ended that, this is a racket. This is a waste of time.
Yep.
And especially with COVID. It was perfect timing, really, because COVID happened right around the time when I was ending that situation. I was like, oh, well, it's all right. I'm not going to dance with a mask on,
Yeah.
That's just stupid. So, yeah, it was perfect timing. And then with the whole thing in 2021, that was a big pivot for me and, of how do I continue my podcast and create meaningful content and speak the truth. And, it's just been a real journey ever since.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one light and fluffy vain question before I get into something heavy. I spent about a year and a half taking ballroom dancing.
Nice.
And I'm curious, which is your favorite of the dances?
Well, that's a good question. Everybody asks me that all the time. I used to like all the Latin dances, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm a little more hot-blooded, but Paso Doble was my favorite.
I like that one, but I found it rather difficult.
It's not a social dance.
Right.
It's a performing dance.
Yeah.
But I like them all. They're really all so beautiful. When you get the to me, dancing is something that God has given us as a physical expression of the laws of the universe. It really is. If you really study partnership dancing like I have, and you see all these things, how they work, it's truly profound. It's been one of the reasons God, uses everything for the good. It's truly amazing. Truly amazing. And in my own life, I thought that I had wasted all this time. When in 2021, I was like, oh my God, I wasted all this time doing dancing and all this stupid stuff. And yet God was actually training me to read the Bible through these things and to have a very unique perspective that I would have never gotten in seminary.
Okay. Yep.
Because I studied partnership and duality and dualism and this system that God is the author of duality. God says that He shapes the light and forms the darkness. He's created male and female. He created up and down, left and right, hot and cold. So God is the one who created this dance of life. And dancing, I think physical dancing is such a simple way to experience those principles, because principles are universal.
Mm-hmm.
God's word is universal. And so you can see the dance of life in everything, whether it's DNA or the birds and the bees or, ecosystems. Everything has this dance in it. And when you study dance between a man and a woman, it's a very simple yet very profound way to experience these principles. And I did that for 15 years on a very high level. And, that was a very interesting situation when I started to see how it related to the Bible, how it related to, discernment, and all these things. So I like them all, and they're really beautiful. Today, I really enjoy all of them. I think once you get a flavor for each of them, they're all really nice. Some people like the more classy ballroom dances like waltz and foxtrot and tango. Some people like the rhythmical dances. I think they're all fun. So
my pastor at my church in Montana, he constantly harps on that thing that God works everything for good, everything.
Right.
So someday I hope to get to the same point you are in seeing all the surfing I did as some sort of training me for something. I don't know, man. It seems pretty selfish.
When you least expect it, it'll come to you.
How about you, Josh? You got something that you're not quite sure?
Yeah, well, I mean, years of watching a bunch of YouTube videos, I guess. But that's all, I think that's all, it's stored in your mind somewhere. And I find myself those things popping up to the right times. So at some point, it's a toolkit somewhere. I might not be able to access it all the time when I need it, but I found that to be helpful at some point. But I looked at that, what the heck? Why didn't I just, right. What am I doing? Yeah. Also, I wanted to ask, you mentioned seeing, the principles of life reflected in dance and in that experience. And I'd be interested in maybe one or two, if you could, where you had an experience, where you saw that reflected.
So the big one for me has been to have an awareness that everything is a dance between two things. How does that play out in the Bible? For example, you see this actually everywhere in the Bible. And if you learn to read the Bible this way, it gives you a much deeper understanding of the realities and the teachings that are in the Bible. Because the number one reason why people get into arguments or there's lopsided theology is because they don't read things in context, right? It's number one. But they also don't have a deep understanding for the mystery of everything that is. Faith is a mystery. On one side, you have all of these verses that talk about personal responsibility. You have to choose to believe in Jesus Christ. You have to make an honest, authentic choice to believe in Jesus. And there's plenty of that. At the same time, there's so many verses that you cannot deny that God has predestined this outcome from the foundation of the world. And that those who believe are the ones who God empowers to believe. That's a very controversial position today, unfortunately, but that's the truth. Acts 13:48 says, those who were appointed to eternal life believed. Not those who believed were appointed to eternal life. So or Philippians 2:12, verse 12 through 13, which is one of my favorite verses on this idea, which is, work out with your salvation with fear and trembling. If you just stop there on verse 12, that's Catholicism or orthodoxy or religion.
You mean that verse itself out of context?
If you took that verse out of context and you made a perspective and you went one way with it in a lopsided direction without an understanding of the dance, then you're going to go off the narrow road. You're going to go off into an imbalance. Just like if I tell you in your physical body that you need to speed up. If that's all you know, you're going to rush the beat, because there are times when you need to slow down too. So there's both speeding up and slowing down in the dance. And the same thing is with the Bible. So with this idea with Philippians 2:12, verse 13, if you just took verse 12 out of context, you now have every religion in history. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because you might not make it. That's the implication.
Right.
But verse 13 tells you, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That means that your willing, meaning your desire to work your salvation, is actually God working through you, which is such a profound concept, which is this concept that you, on your first person level, like a video game, like first person shooter, you're walking through the, Doom. I used to play a bunch of these video games, like, what do you call it? Not Doom, but there's an older one. It's the German one, dang it.
Well, I was never into video games.
Okay.
So.
Anyway, I'm totally blank on the name, but you'd walk around and you shoot at these guys and stuff. And anyway, from your perspective, you're doing something authentically. You're choosing. You're yourself. You're not a puppet.
Yeah.
At the same time, the Bible presents you with this profound mystery that when you look back on the corridor of time of your life, all the good that you did was because of God. How does that work? I don't know. That's a dance. That's a mystery, because it's both of these things that seem opposite of each other, and yet they're integrated in this beautiful dance. And so the Bible presents you constantly with these two, not necessarily opposing things, but these complementary perspectives that must be held in conjunction with one another. On one side, you are given with plenty of verses to take responsibility, confirm your election, do this, do that. And on the other side, you're given so much assurance that the Spirit is the guarantee of your inheritance, that, God works all things for the good for those he's predestined and given to Christ. And all of these verses that are a done deal.
Yes.
And people go, oh, well, I believe in this part, and then you're wrong. And the other ones, I believe in this one, and you're wrong. No, the real truth is that both of these things are dancing together in a very mysterious and profound truth. And that is everywhere. If you look in the book of Proverbs, for example, wisdom is about having both perspectives. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he thinks himself too wise. Don't answer a fool according to his folly, so that you don't become like him. Well, which one is true? Well, timing determines which one is true. Sometimes you have to answer a fool according to his folly. Sometimes it's better not to answer a fool and just leave him alone.
So these verses aren't meant to be taken as absolute universals applied in each and every single
because for example, sometimes, and this is again wisdom. Wisdom is about understanding when, like if I have a statement and say a plant needs water. That's a statement. That's true, right? Plants need water. But if you give a cup of water to a tiny little sprout, you're going to drown it and you're going to destroy it. If you give a thimble of water to a tree, the tree is going to die. So wisdom is understanding when is what appropriate, right? And that comes with life experience. It comes with dancing with God's word and understanding that through life and applying it, making mistakes, making successes, and growing in wisdom. And so wisdom, when you have these types of verses, like some of them are more about personal responsibility, some of them more about reassurance, they apply equally, but circumstantially they're going to apply at different times. And somebody's coming to me and they're saying, you know what, I'm a former Seventh-day Adventist, or I'm a former Catholic, and I have all these synergistic beliefs, and I'm very, I was very works-based in my theology. They're going to really need to meditate on the verses about God's sovereign decree, predestined plan, the Spirit is your guarantee, all of these things that are assurance of salvation and eternal security, which is so important. And then you have people that maybe are being complacent with their walk in Christ. Maybe they're being complacent with their life. Maybe they're not embracing the gifts that God has given them. They're afraid. Those people need to be ministered to with the other side of the message, which is you need to take personal responsibility. You need to act. You need to do this.
That type's a little more common, huh?
That's right. That type is a little more common. So most of the time, the side of predestination and eternal security and these things that remind you, it's like this. It's like if you could imagine there's a road, right? There's a road. And on one side of the road, you have all this stuff about predestination and eternal security. And on the other side of the road, you have confirm your election, or be responsible, take action, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, all this stuff, right? And we're going like this through life. Because once you take one perspective, inadvertently, it's going to lead to an imbalance if you just operate by that perspective only. If you're all about work out your salvation with fear and trembling, that's all you think about, then eventually you're going to get off the road and you're going to go into religion, right? If you are just on the side of eternal security, there's nothing wrong about that, but you might get complacent and not take responsibility of what you need to do. Right? People, for example, criticize me when they say, oh, you believe in once saved, always saved. Yes, I do. But who are we talking about? Are we talking about God saying that you're saved? Or are you saying somebody who's just saying, oh, I'm saved, and therefore they're saved? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about God? Well, if we're talking about God, then yes, I believe that if God says that he's saved somebody, they're saved. Once God has saved somebody, they're saved. I believe
you can't lose your salvation.
You cannot lose your salvation. Because that would mean, what does that mean if you can lose your salvation? That means that God, as the sovereign being, cannot control the ultimate outcome that defines who he is, which is the Savior. And that's a very controversial point today, but it's, this is the point. We're at the end of history and there's a lot of false doctrine. The the pillar of the gospel is that God can save you without your cooperation.
Yeah, well,
That's the entire point.
At the end, even the devil will turn around, right?
The devil's going to be destroyed, but he will bow the knee,
right?
And so will the demons right before they're destroyed. So ultimately, God is sovereign, and if you can lose your salvation, then He is not sovereign. And a lot of people don't realize that this synergistic idea that you can lose your salvation is literally one step away from religion. It's one step away from religion, because if you can lose your salvation, then you must work to maintain your salvation. If it's not God that's working to maintain you, then you don't have a gospel whatsoever.
When you use the word religion, you're obviously using it as a pejorative. So could you define it?
Yeah, religion to me, at the end of the day, is the opposite of the gospel. And if the narrow road is narrow, right, then religion is everything else, right? So the more narrow, like for example, anything you want optimal performance in, and we can actually look at this in health. Health is a great way to look at this, because God has decreed very specific operating windows for things. Like your blood has a very specific pH that it operates by. And if it deviates from that, I forget the name, it's like 7.14 or something like that. But when it deviates even by 1/10 of a degree from that pH, you could die. So everything has a very narrow window of performance, which I think is a reflection of the fact that God is very narrow, right? In that sense, like the faith that we have and the truth is extremely narrow, which means that everything else, all the other deviations, is the wide road. Right? There's 100,000 counterfeits out there. There's 100,000 ways to take the truth and go, now it's something different. Kind of like the truth, but like it's a little different. So with things being narrow, that means that religion is the wide road, number one. And religion is the opposite of what the gospel is. The gospel ultimately provides you with a profound ontological situation, which is that you must be in order to do. You must be born again in order to do good works, live forever, etc., etc., etc. You must be in order to do. Religion is the opposite of that. Religion is you must do in order to be. And you are constantly chasing this being, whether it's enlightenment, what is it what they call it? Nirvana, the afterlife, whatever else. You're always chasing something and you're doing in order to be. I got to do in order to be. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because you might not make it. And if you do, then that's great. You're going to have this level in heaven and you're going to go above that. It's this entire system. But that is opposite of what God has given us through the gospel. The gospel is you must be. Well, how can I be? What do I need to do in order to be? Well, you can't. That's the point. It's like the wind. You don't know where it comes from. You don't know where it comes from. You don't know where it goes. What do you mean? Well, that means that God is the one who's doing the being and giving you being in a mysterious, profound, supernatural way. And now you can do. Now you have a new life. Now you have a new identity, because you have a new being that's been given to you. What a profound thought that is.
Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of the verse in today morning's service where he said, you are placed in heavenly places. You're already, in Christ, you have been raised up into the heavenly places. You are there. Now it's just a matter of, believe it and act in it.
Live in that in that situation. You have been given new life. You have been given new being.
Right.
God has given you new being. So now you have new actions available. Religion is the opposite of that. That's why it's slavery, because you're constantly chasing this state of being through doing actions, whether it's pilgrimages, praying for the dead, sacraments, yada, yada, yada. It's a rat race.
Yeah.
And it's the devil's version of salvation. But of course, it doesn't lead anywhere. It leads to destruction.
Puts you in a fundamental position of lack rather than a fundamental position of, I am a divine creature. I have abundance.
God is, God's name in the Old Testament is basically translated to, I am the one who is. I am the being one. I am the source of being. So God just is. He doesn't do in order to be. He is, and therefore he does. Mm-hmm. And so he shares that with us, who he's chosen to reveal that to, and we receive a new being. And in that new being, we are participating in new actions and new things that we're doing. You have a new identity, and that's given to you. What a profound thought that's given to you. And then you can trust in that work that it's going to be completed.
Whereas religion is the opposite of that mentality. You must do in order to achieve this because the outcome is dependent on you. It's not dependent on God. Or it's dependent on you cooperating with God.
Yeah.
But people don't realize that this is the problem with Arminian philosophy, and it is philosophy, it's not theology. Arminian, not Armenian. Yeah, that's important. That's an important distinction because I got nothing against the Armenians, but Arminian with an I, named after Jacobus Arminius.
Okay.
In the 1600s,
Right.
Arminianism, which is really just some flavor of the wide road of synergism, because there's on one side you have Pelagianism, which is full-on antichrist. We are basically little gods, and we can choose the good. We don't have original sin. Like that's a heresy, very obvious. But then you have again, the wide road is very wide, and a good counterfeit is that it's almost right, right?
Yeah.
It's not that it's obviously wrong. It's something that looks almost right, and it's wrong. So you have many versions of that. You have Protestant Arminianism, you have Catholicism, you have Eastern Orthodox, all these different versions of synergistic philosophy, which is the idea that the outcome, i.e. salvation, is dependent upon your cooperation with God. But what most people don't realize who get so offended by these things for some reason, they get offended by a sovereign God, they don't realize that cooperation implicitly demands codependence. If the outcome of salvation requires that I cooperate with God, in other words, God cannot save you unless you cooperate. Doesn't matter if it's 99% God and 1% you. You must cooperate. Therefore, God is dependent on you for the outcome.
Right.
You have a codependent situation. Of course, I'm dependent on God. We all can acknowledge that. But the Arminians will never realize and acknowledge that in your philosophy, you are also making God dependent on you. Doesn't matter if it's 0.0001%. But if that's the linchpin, God cannot get glory as the Savior because your pesky free will prevented him from achieving his purpose, which of course is heresy, which is why it was declared a heresy in the 1600s by the Synod of Dort. And of course, Calvinism. I don't consider myself a Calvinist. I just consider myself a monergist because I believe in monergistic salvation. In other words, I believe that God can save the sinner without the sinner's cooperation. And that's the pillar of the gospel. That's the good news of the gospel.
Yeah.
That you are saved and God sustains you through the ups and downs of life for his glory. And that is what we rest on. But Calvinism was a response to Arminianism. Calvinism is not something that people just came up with and say, here's the 5 points. The 5 points actually come from Arminius. Arminius's people came up with 5 basic tenets, and the people who were opposing that, which were the Calvinists, were responding to it with their 5 points, and that's how you have the modern tulip, which I think tulip is biblically defensible, but I don't consider myself a Calvinist because, again, I don't follow Calvin, I follow Jesus. Calvin had some things I don't agree with. He was, very for institutional religion and so on. So it is what it is. But anyway, that was kind of a tangent, so I forgot what we were talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
So
you asked me about religion. That's what it was. What did I thought about religion?
yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's right. That was a bit of a tangent, but you definitely answered. So I've been watching your videos, and one video that struck me that you recently did a Substack post telling everybody that you reached 1 million views on this video. So I assume it's your most popular video, and it's the one that is I don't remember the exact title, but it's like are modern Israeli Jews the
Why the Jews are not God's chosen people.
why the Jews are not God's chosen?
Yeah.
Okay, pretty powerful title.
Pretty controversial, yeah.
Right. And then I thought about a personal story that related this, watched your video, and I thought, okay, this is the video I would want this man I had an experience with to watch. Because what happened was, I'll tell you this story. There's a church potluck, and David, let's call him, looks over at me and he says, he knows I do interviews and I work for KLA TV. And he says, so what have you been doing lately? Tell me about your latest interviews. And I know that David is kind of a classic evangelical Zionist Christian, right?
Right.
And my last two interviews, one was Bart Sibrel, which he's the moon conspiracy, right?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
He calls himself the Moon Man. doesn't believe in the moon landing. Neither do I. But
Yeah, I don't either.
right. Then the other one was E. Michael Jones, the infamous, famous Catholic guy that explores the Jew question.
Right.
Ad infinitum, right? And so I knew he couldn't handle E. Michael Jones, right? So I just said, the moon man. And we talked about that a little. And he looks at me and he says, so you don't think we went to the moon? I said, no, I'm pretty sure we didn't.
Yeah.
Especially after interviewing this guy.
Definitely not.
And then he says, well, what other stuff do you not believe in? And then I thought, okay, let's do baby steps here. So I said, I don't think Oswald was some lone gunman kook who just acted on his own. So I don't believe in the Orthodox version of JFK.
Right.
And I figured I was in the safe zone because even David, will go with in that one, you're going with the majority because I think it's up to 75% that don't believe the official story.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And he agrees with that. So I said, okay, it looks like we can get a little deeper in the pool here. And I said, 9/11. And he says, yeah, I've always wondered about the Saudi connection in 9/11 and what happened. And then I thought, oh, okay. I thought, I see. You saw that they shipped the bin Laden family out of the country, and then we blamed bin Laden, and there's weird stuff going on with the Saudis. And I said, yeah. He says, so you think the Saudis had something to do with it? I said, well, they could have definitely had a part in it. And I said, among others.
Among others, right.
Among others, right? And then he kind of looks at me and he's like, well, like what others?
Who
and I
else?
knew here we were. And I said, well, I think the Israelis and the Mossad had something to do with it. And this guy is a evangelical Zionist, right? And so I knew I was in thin ice. And I said, well, have you ever heard about the dancing Israelis?
Oh, right.
These people that filmed it and then went back to Israel to report that they were there to film the event, stuff like that.
Right.
I was just getting started, right? But he was aghast. And then it was like, okay, we're not talking about 9/11. And he looks at me and he says, so you don't think that God actually promised this land to Israel?
Oh, gosh.
And here we go. Anyway, I won't tell you about the rest of the conversation, but when we were done, he walks over to the pastor and he says, you got some real anti-Semites among your congregation.
Wow.
So we have this Saturday Bible study. It's actually a breakfast, men's breakfast and a Bible study. We go over this issue 4 sessions over 4 Saturdays. And I thought, it bounced back and forth. Everybody's got to have their say. Some people are pretty well versed on it. Some aren't. And then, of course, David is always piping up with, Genesis, Genesis 3 or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I wish I would have had that video to give him. So I want to ask you, I watched the whole video. It's like 45, 50 minutes long.
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half, actually.
Is it an hour and a half? Okay,
Yeah.
So if you were with him and you only had an elevator pitch,
Oh, God.
I mean, you can't, right? You can't. Whenever I ask for an elevator pitch, I get a 30-minute, long thing. But see, the thing is, what troubles me is I think that David's attitude is what allows our government and Israel to get away with so much mischief and evil.
Yeah,
Including and especially right now, the
For
genocide going on in Gaza.
for sure. Yeah.
And that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's impossible. It's really, really hard. But what do you do with a guy like that?
I mean, it's tough. You do what my answer would be, you do what you think is best and you let God do the rest. It's God that will be responsible for them opening their eyes, in that particular moment. It might be you that maybe plants a seed, or maybe you crack the whole thing in a conversation. You really don't know. So our job from the first person perspective is to just act on what we believe. I think that you have to just act on what you believe. And sometimes you may make a mistake, but if you do, God will use it for the good. We know that. If you had a success, then you know that God was the one working through you to have that success. So this goes back to religion versus the gospel of doing and being. I released a recent documentary called Christianity is the True Zen. And I talked about this point pretty in depth, which is that Christianity, the gospel, the monergistic gospel, is the only path, the only spiritual path that allows you to embrace action fully and participate fully in the outcome, while also being fully confident that it's going to be taken care of for the highest good. So you have fullest action, but non-detachment.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look, for example, in the Eastern traditions, they focus on non-detachment, and so they rip themselves from the world. And that's not what the Bible calls you to. The Bible doesn't call you to go and meditate, forever and just
Be an ascetic.
be an ascetic,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And to erase your operating system.
Right.
The Bible tells you not to be attached to the world, but be in the world, but not
Yeah.
of the world.
Life is the light of men, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Live,
Live.
and then you will see.
Live
after.
and let your light shine to the world, proclaim the truth. So be in the world, take action, while also be confident that whatever happens is for the greatest good, which is such a profound thing, because if you don't have that second part, then every time you talk to somebody, well, crap, I got to get it right.
That's right. It's like running a business.
If it's like, if I don't do this right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
God's not going to
Yeah.
save them or whatever else, and that's not the gospel. The gospel.
And then you'll judge your efforts on whether or not David is convinced and came over to your
Exactly.
side.
Right.
Yeah.
So my perspective is speak the truth, do the best that you can, act on what you believe. And if God has purpose to wake that person up, he will draw that person to him. Right now, there's a lot of things happening in the news, and there's a lot of betrayals and a lot of shenanigans. And I think that these things are speeding up, and God is using all of the shenanigans that the devil is doing on his level for the good. Because, for example, all of these, like with the recent stuff with Epstein that happened,
Mhm.
and now Trump is, it's just such a circus show with this. He's blaming it on the Democrats, and it never existed. It was, it's a fake list and all this stuff. So literally, they were campaigning on this release of Epstein for years and years and years, and now suddenly all of them tuck tail and turn around and are lying through their teeth about this. And so a lot of people are getting betrayed, and God is going to use that betrayal to draw people out of the idolatry that they were having with Trump. And the more things happen, and there's going to be more and more happening over the next couple of years, every one of these evil things, God is using that to draw people to himself.
Yeah.
When the liberal stuff went crazy with Biden, and some liberals gave up on their perspective, God is using that to draw liberals to himself. When Trump is showing who he is, who's a con man, God is going to use that to bring the conservatives to himself. And so God is bringing people to himself through all of these evil things that are happening by way of man, by way of the devil. And so the outcome is assured. So whenever you're dealing with people who are very hard to deal with, you do your best, and you know that God will use them. Like, for example, with your friend, right now Zionism is collapsing. It's getting exposed, just like the deep state was being exposed.
Yeah.
Because it's time to collapse that narrative. It achieved what it was supposed to do, which is to discredit Protestantism and set up everything they needed to set up. So now they're destroying Zionism and exposing it. It's very trendy to talk about the Jews now and to basically get Jew
Did you
killed.
see Tucker with Rubio?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And these guys are talking about Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. But anybody who spends half a second, Israel's not mentioned there.
It's not, no.
But you go to a site like the Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries, and it says, quote, those who bless Israel will be blessed, is a promise from Genesis 12:3.
It's not.
It's a lie.
It's a lie. It is a lie.
And
yeah.
it is being exposed, isn't it?
It is being exposed. Dispensationalism is crumbling, and people are. It's getting a lot of momentum. And so what you had, 6 to 8 years ago with the deep state, how it was people were waking up to the liberal media and how everything's controlled.
Yep.
You are now having deep state 2.0 with Zionism and the Jewish influence and American government and everything else. Because ultimately, what is this going to? Ultimately, we need to go back to where the beast was before it received a mortal wound. And what were the conditions of that? Well, you didn't have democracy, you had kingdoms and kings.
First of all, when was the mortal wound?
1798, when the Pope was arrested and the papacy was declared an end.
French Revolution.
French Revolution.
Okay.
By Berthier.
Yep.
And basically, the papacy was declared to be over, and that was 1,260 years after Justinian decreed the Pope to be the grand poobah of the church and basically gave him all the power. So exactly 1,260 years passed from the point of ascension and the point of seeming like it received a mortal wound and died. But it didn't. It just went underground. And ever since then, we've had many threads that have been designed on purpose to ultimately bring everybody back to the mother church. One of those threads has been Zionism, which is one of the purposes of Zionism was to destroy Protestantism. They used people like Darby and Schofield and all the commentaries that were from the Jesuits about Jewish-focused futurism to completely destroy Protestant eschatology. Because there's many goals that you accomplish with that. If you are the devil and you have your kingdom that's operating in broad daylight, you need to convince people that your kingdom is the will of God. It's not, the satanic kingdom. So the only way to do that is to change how the end times things are interpreted. Because if you read the Bible in its context, and especially in its historical context, there's no other candidate for the Antichrist power on the earth than the papacy. There's no other candidate for the fifth and final empire of Daniel 2 than the Roman Catholic Church, which is the continuation of the Roman Empire. So all of these things are very clearly testified to by history and by scripture. That's a problem if you're the devil. So the devil, through his Jesuits and through his minions, basically changed how these prophecies are interpreted. One of them was futurism, putting everything to the future. Oh, it's about the Jews. The Jews are the center of Bible prophecy. Of course that's false. The center of Bible prophecy is the church. Who cares about people who rejected Christ? They're going to be destroyed. The people who are in the church need to know that the Antichrist power is an usurper. It's going to appear as the will of God. That's the issue of the church age. It's counterfeit faith. It's not atheism or Islam or Zionism. It's counterfeit faith. So they needed to change that. And so that was a big deal. They also created preterism. Of course, there was some preterist thought before that, but the Jesuits really weaponized it through Luis de Alcazar. He was the first one to really publish his commentary on Revelation. And preterism is what? Same thing. It's about the past and it's about the Jews. So everything you look at today is mostly either the Jews in the future or the Jews in the past. Whereas the true way to interpret these prophecies is throughout history and from the lens of the church. And when you do that, well, it points you to the Catholic Church and the papacy who entered the temple, proclaimed himself to be God, and changed the times and laws and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's a whole thing. But Zionism destroyed Protestantism because, number one, it changed. The reformers didn't agree on everything, but they did agree on one thing, which is that the papacy was the fulfillment of the Antichrist warnings in the Bible. And so that was a real problem. Well, within 200 years of that, 300 years, Protestants largely started to believe dispensationalism. And they no longer believed in what the original reformers believed eschatologically. So that changed immediately. And because you believe that, okay, let's say you believe that the Jews, and so on and so forth, well, you're not looking at the Antichrist power anymore. So then the Antichrist power can do its tentacles and move in the world with the secret society and Jesuits and Freemasons and Rothschild banking and do all the dirty deeds it needs to do to subvert reality again, to bring everybody to itself so that there's this echo chamber and everybody comes back to the beast. Because Protestants were a real thorn in the papacy's side. And if the Protestants are going, look, there's the Antichrist, well, you need to change where they're pointing. And now all the Protestants are pointing to Islam and whatever else, communism or all these stupid things. And of course, you also had communism, which was developed by the Jesuits and practiced by the Jesuits in their reductions for 150 years before the French Revolution. And promulgated throughout every communist country, the Jesuits were there. People think the Jews did it. Of course, the Jews were there as well. But one thing people don't realize, and this is so important for today's conversation on the Jews, because everybody's talking about the Jews this, the Jews that. It's not just the Jews. Like the workings of Satan are in the background. There are secret societies. These people are saying they're one thing and they're doing another. I'm a Jesuit. I'm a Freemason. I'm a whatever. It doesn't matter. You're worshiping the devil. And these people are just all in cahoots. And the Bible tells you, which is very important, the Bible tells you that the devil in the church age, meaning the time between Christ's ascension and his return, that time period, the devil during that period gave his throne and power to this system, which is the beast. And of course, you identify the beast as the papal institution, that the institution of men that rules as the presence of Christ on earth throughout time, the counterfeit presence, obviously, and changes the times and laws and proclaims himself to be God and is worshipped as God on earth and so on and so forth. I have a whole series on that. But that's who the devil gave his throne and power to. So it doesn't matter whether it's the Freemasons or the Jesuits or this and that, they all work ultimately to serve the throne of the devil, because this is all about getting the devil back into the world to be worshipped as the presence of God on earth. Until 1798, the popes were worshipped as the presence of God on earth. There's so many damning quotes that I've documented from official documents, Catholic documents, where the papacy is basically, you need to worship me if you want salvation. You must have obedience to the pontiff in order for you to have salvation. You must obey the pontiff. You must do this. You cannot enter the door of salvation unless the pontiff leads you by the hand through the door. So it's this counterfeit Christ that you have to pledge your allegiance to. And that counterfeit Christ, the Bible warns, will come back into the world and people will marvel after it. That means that all of these shenanigans like Zionism, communism, whatever else, it's all designed as a dialectical response to bring people back to the mother church. The stuff with the left and the commie, tranny time story hour and the extreme communism taking over the country and the world and all this stuff, this is just designed to push people more and more back to religion and nationalism. The thing with the Jews is designed to ultimately crumble the state of Israel, destroy the Jewish identity that's been largely Zionist in the last 80 years, prime them for a charismatic conversion in the Middle East and a peace deal, and ultimately create the precedent to hate anything Jewish, which is going to be associated to the Sabbath. That's why I have my hat, the Lord's Day, because ultimately this is going to come down to Sunday laws throughout the world. And it's not just Sunday laws, but it's really about obeying this counterfeit power again. The Pope is going to be back in the prime and the limelight of the world, and people are going to marvel after this institution. And when you, as a worshiper of God, say, I refuse to follow your legislation of resting on the first day and treating that as the Sabbath and acknowledging that man can change God's laws and acknowledging that the power of the Pope to change the times and laws is true, I refuse to do that. And you're going to persecute me for that. That's the time that is going to be coming upon everybody in the next, I think, 6 to 10 years. And people are not ready for it because they're so angry at the Jews that they don't realize they're being baited with a nice little carrot with a 6-pointed star on it to go like this, and then finally bait them into religion. Because all right now, for example, what's happening right now, all these Protestants who were dispensational and they believed in the Jews this and the Jews that, they are having a crisis of identity. And a lot of them are leaving their Baptist churches, their Methodist churches, their Presbyterian churches, and they're going back to Catholicism, Orthodoxy. Because you know what? The Catholics were right. This Protestant stuff is a joke. On one side, you have the woke liberal, infiltrations with just all the nonsense that's going on. On another side, you have the prosperity preachers that have totally made a joke out of preaching. And then on the other side, you have the dispensational Zionist, conservative, ultra, warmongering Christian Zionist crowd that is just so deluded that between these three things I just listed, Protestantism has become a total joke. And that's been by design. In the last 500 years, the goal of the Jesuits was, you know what? We're going to learning against learning. We're going to wage war by way of infiltration, by way of culture shaping, by way of shaping through movie theaters and ideas and theologies and counterfeit teachings and things like that. And pretty soon, 500 years later, what do you have? Well, you have the Lutheran Declaration, was it 1999, I think, was the joint declaration on justification between the Lutherans and the Catholics. I mean, the guy who, I forget his name, but he's passed away now. He's, maybe we're all Catholics now. The protest is over, So these things are coming full circle now, because now as this Zionist stuff is collapsing, this is the final nail in the coffin to Protestantism. And that was the point. You stupid Protestants, you thought the Jews were the chosen people? Look how stupid you are. Come back to the mother church. That was the whole point. But see, they fed that lie through many years and subversions to take attention off the Catholic Church so that the Catholic Church would get in and infiltrate all these things through their Jesuit, and other secret society members. And at the same time, discredit Protestantism when it was time to cash it in. The devil's cashing it in now. And so all this stuff that you're seeing with the Jews and Zionism, it's going to go full circle back into religion. And eventually, once they Christianize society, the New World Order is Christian nationalist. It's not a Zionist New World Order. It's not a communist New World Order. It's not a Muslim New World Order. These are the counterfeits. These are the counterfeit boogeymen. The real boogeyman that people don't see is the Catholic Church, the papacy. It's going to be a golden age. It's going to seem so great. It's going to seem, moral, and it's going to solve all these problems that communism couldn't solve and that extreme capitalism couldn't solve. And everybody's going to marvel after this system. It's going to seem so rational. And they're going to start passing their certain regulations. And you're going to see a rise of the Eucharist again, of Sunday sacredness. And if you work on Sunday, then you're going to be warned or punished or whatever else. And this system is what people are going to be marveling after. This is the entire warnings of the Bible. It's not warning you about obvious evil stuff. It's warning you about counterfeit worship, which has been the issue from Cain all the way to the very end with the Revelation. Cain was not an atheist. He was not a Muslim. He was not a Zionist. Cain was a worshiper of God, pretending to be a worshiper of God, but his heart posture wasn't with God. He was acting as a worshiper of God, but in fact, he was not sincere. And you see that throughout history. This is the issue. It's counterfeit worship of God. It's not obviously, evil stuff. And this is the problem that people don't realize. Anyway.
Okay, so you say that the Jews are part of this dialectic. They're a problem. We find out what the problem is. We have a reaction to it. The solution, the church comes in as something very attractive.
Right.
Nevertheless, considering what's going on right now in terms of the genocide in Gaza, the potential war with Iran, etc., not to mention a couple more things, the extent to which the Jews basically seem to be running things.
For sure, yeah.
Our monetary system, our entertainment, our press, our educational institutions, big pharma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that they have a code which we can access called the Talmud, which tells you where they stand and how antichrist it is.
Absolutely. So
I get what you're saying, that we're going to bare our teeth and our fangs are going to come out and we're going to go after the evil, and then it's going to be used as a trick to get us back into the mother church.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the evil doesn't have to be dealt with.
Oh, for sure. There's a reckoning. Yeah. And in the Bible, God has always used evil people to pass judgment on other evil people.
Right.
He used Nebuchadnezzar or Sennacherib to judge and punish the apostate Israelites who were wicked and sacrificing their children and worshiping other gods. Oh, you think you want to be wicked? Okay, great. I'll bring another wicked and punish you really dearly. So what I see with all this stuff, it's hard sometimes to tell exactly what's going on because there's so many smoke and mirrors. But the Bible does paint a very consistent precedent that wicked are used by God for his purposes. They are used to reveal his justice when he judges them. And he also uses them to pass judgment on other wicked people, which is a very consistent theme in history. And then he comes at the end to pass judgment on the whole thing. So, I do think there's a reckoning for the Jews. They've done many evil things in history, from all the things that people know: coin clipping, blood libel, usury, poisoning the wells. I mean, however many things that you can't talk on YouTube. But ultimately, the devil, you have to remember, the devil is the most clever being that God has ever created. And the devil is also been around for more than 6,000 years. So he's very intelligent. He doesn't die, so he's able to learn, and he's extremely conniving. So from Genesis 3, he was announced that his time would be up at one point. The Messiah would come and you're going to be out. That's it. So from that very point in time, the devil's been very active in creating counterfeits in the world of the plan of salvation with counterfeit Christs, and in wanting to achieve this goal of a one world system where he could be worshiped. So there's many threads that he's created that ultimately he is, in the church age, going to integrate into this system. Because again, if the devil is going to be worshipped as God, which is what the Bible tells you God has allowed him to achieve temporarily, then the devil has to have a unified system, right? That makes sense. If the devil wants the world to be in his thrall and under his influence, then he has to have a new world order. And the Bible says that there will be such a thing. Yeah. The question is, what is the quality of that new world order? Well, it's not going to be Jewish, it's not going to be commie, it's not going to be Muslim, it's going to be Catholic through the papacy, because that's what it was and that's what it's returning to. That means that all of these things that the devil's done with the Jews, which are very evil, he baited them through many evil things, mysticism, all the evil things that they've done, everybody knows. he's going to use that against him. The devil uses blackmail in his system. It's like all these secret society people. You know, when you are a Christian and you're born again, that relationship with other Christians and with God is one of freedom. And it's one of generosity. It's one of life. The devil can't do that. The devil can't cause his followers to be born again. The devil uses fear, desire, threatening, all these different things. You either the left or the right. Which one do you want? Do you want bribery or do you want threats? That's how they achieve their goals. And so all of these people have a knife to each other's throat. So the devil uses blackmail in his individual situations, but also in culturally too. The Jews were baited into very evil, satanic things throughout their history. Just look in the Talmud, like you said. Now, all of that's going to be cashed in by the devil to destroy that, integrate it into this final system, because the Jews need to be converted. And then once the Jews convert, you're going to have a perfect precedent to demonize anybody who wants to rest the way God commanded and not the way that the popes command, which is on the first day of the week. And it's not going to be just Sunday laws. It's going to be this entire religious system. The Protestants are already starting to embrace the Eucharist. It could be this entire thing that if you don't participate in this thing, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you part of this thing? You're not part of the will of God. So we need to punish you. We need to get you out of society. Maybe we need to kill you. And that's what's happening. And so the Jews do need to have a reckoning. There will be a reckoning. But the devil is collapsing this system to use that as a precedent to bring everybody back into the mother church, to convert the Jews, and to destroy the final layer of resistance that there could be to his religious system. Because his religious system expresses itself by Sunday sacredness. And it's not just Sunday laws, it's keeping this day sacred, because that's what Catholic social teaching is all about. That's what all these ecumenical things are all about, with Green Sunday and climate change, everything. It's all coming back to this day, because that's the day that honors the devil. And I have a whole series on it. It's a whole can of worms as to why I made that claim. But if you understand how the Sabbath is a physical expression of the gospel, the Sabbath is not given to the Jews, because first off, the Sabbath was given to the Israelites, or I should say reminded to the Israelites before Mount Sinai, before they had the covenant on Mount Sinai. And Jesus tells you that the Sabbath was given to mankind as a gift. And if you understand, okay, now that we have the New Testament, let's go back in Genesis. Let's look at this at the beginning there. What happened? Well, first thing you see, God creates everything. God creates man and woman. What's the first thing they do? They rest. They rest in paradise together. That's a picture of the end. Man and woman with God in paradise. Christ, his church, in paradise forever. God declares the end from the beginning. So in the very beginning, on the first seventh day, God declared the gospel. Not verbally, but typologically through the seventh day. And then you have obviously other things too, like Noah kept the 7-day pattern. So I talk about how the Sabbath was transmitted throughout time, and it was reminded to the Israelites on the Exodus, but the Sabbath is given to mankind. So the Sabbath is a picture of the gospel, and also the Sabbath is not yet fulfilled, because the point of the Sabbath is not this legalistic burden. The point of the Sabbath is to every week give you a placeholder for eternity, to remind you of the gospel in a physical, meaningful way. Because the gospel is not just this cognitive thing. The gospel is a living, true, redemptive act of God that's supernatural. Yes, we are saved right now. We are saved, we believe in Jesus, but Jesus isn't here right now. The world is satanic. The world needs to be judged, and the world needs to be redeemed. We need to have eternal bodies that aren't dying. It's not done yet, right? So there's an already not yet component to the gospel. That means that the final fulfillment of the gospel is physical. That's the whole point. It's not this Gnostic thing. It's a physical thing. And so the Sabbath is the placeholder until that point in time, just like marriage. Marriage is a covenant that is also a typological placeholder for the final union that we have with Christ when he returns. Paul says that men are representing Christ and the woman is representing the church. So we love the woman as Christ loved the church, and the woman submits to the man as the church submits to Christ. So that means that this idea of the two, male and female, was from the very beginning created to create a picture of the gospel. This dance of life, the union between a man and a woman is actually supposed to be a physical experience that is a placeholder, Paul says, for the final reality with Jesus on earth. That's a physical reunion with God. So when you have intimate relations with your wife or your husband, if you're a woman, what the Bible tells you is that that's supposed to be a little taste of what it's supposed to be like when Jesus returns and everybody's overwhelmed with joy and has an eternal body. The Sabbath is the same thing. So marriage and the Sabbath are two things that are not yet fulfilled. Jesus says that there will be no more marriage in the eternal state. Because why? Because marriage has been fulfilled. It's not a placeholder anymore. When Jesus returns, the groom is here. We have the wedding supper, and that's it. We're done. We don't need to get married. We're living forever. The whole point of marriage was to point to this future thing. Now, once the future thing is, that's fulfilled. Same thing with the Sabbath. So if you understand now, long-winded, story, but if you understand the Sabbath is the physical picture of the gospel, and I talk about this in great depth in my various series, my Sabbath series and my Lord's Day series. If you understand it's not this legalistic burden, it is a physical expression of the gospel, of trusting in God physically, because you abstain from work, you abstain from worldly things, and you remind yourself of the plan of salvation and of the eternal state. Every week you get that gift to remember what that's like. If you know that about the Sabbath and the gospel, and that's God's day, and you know that the devil wants to be worshipped as God, and you know the history behind Sunday sacredness and how the devil so cleverly and so cunningly changed the sabbatical aspect. He didn't really change it, but he changed perception of it, let's put it that way, from the seventh day to the first day. Very clever. I have a 17-hour series on it, the Lord's Day. Took hundreds of years of very conniving dialectics between Roman persecutions, between Jewish shenanigans, between the Gnostics that were pushing on the Christians early. Little by little, people redefined and eventually they accepted the counterfeit. And that counterfeit has been enforced throughout time. The Catholic Church has always enforced its obedience to the pontiff, which is the mark of a good Catholic, is to obey the pontiff. And that obedience is going to come back into the full front. But in order for that to be fully enforced, you need to get rid of the Jews. They need to be converted, because as long as there's the Jews, anybody who wants to worship on the seventh day and rest, you can worship any day of the week, but you want to rest on the seventh day, that's a problem for the devil, because that means you're trusting God, you're not trusting in him. And so we need to get rid of the Jews. We need to collapse this whole situation. We need to undo what we did. So now we have this whole Zionism thing being revealed to everybody, and everybody's getting Jew-pilled. But they don't realize that these things are just designed ultimately to push people back into religion, collapse Protestantism, and set a precedent to demonize people who want to keep the Sabbath once they start pushing Sunday laws, which they're already doing. That's part of Project 2025, is to push Sunday laws. That is one of their, and in fact, I haven't checked recently, but I'm pretty sure that he got confirmed. I forget the guy's name now, but he was literally the labor secretary or whatever, he was confirmed, I think last week or something, but Jonathan Berry, he was one of the authors of Project 2025. And he got nominated, and I think he got confirmed too as the labor secretary, labor solicitor, whatever it's called. And so he's the one that's going to be in charge of basically determining these various labor laws. And he's the one who authored, the Project 2025. He's one of the authors in the Sunday laws and everything else. So these people are fanatical about returning blasphemy laws, Sunday laws, all these different things back into the culture. And of course, people are going to go along with it thinking it's a good thing. It's a solution to this 24/7 life and communism. We got to get religion back and got to get our family back and all these things that seem so good on paper, and accept the fact that they're being used for evil. When the devil tempted Jesus, he didn't just willy-nilly come up with stuff out of his butt. He pulled out scripture. Is it not written?
Mm-hmm. Why does it matter so much whether we call if we call the seventh day, the rest day, Saturday or Sunday?
Right.
That's the question here.
Why does it matter?
Yeah. Why does it matter so much?
Have you ever seen these calendars that begin on Monday?
I have. Yeah. It'll be an interesting one of the things that I think needs to happen as these things come to a head is that the world needs to get on the Constantinian calendar, because in order for them to fulfill this worldwide obedience and religious system, they need to get, right now the Muslims have their own calendar where I think the seventh day is like Friday or something like that. And you have Europe starts their day on Monday. Then you have the Constantinian calendar, which is the United States, and they go on Sunday as the first day of the week. So the Constantinian calendar is the one that the Pontifex, Constantine, acting as the pagan Pontifex in 321, decreed as the day of rest. Then in 323, he had his satanic apparition that appeared to him and supposedly, told him to go conquer in this name, and everybody thinks, oh, Jesus appeared to him. How do you know Jesus appeared to Constantine? When you look at the fruits of Constantine's works, they're not indicative of somebody who was born again. They're indicative of somebody who saw a satanic apparition and was deceived into thinking they were talking to God in order to move along the agenda. Because once Constantine decreed Sunday as a day of rest in the Roman Empire, within 2 years, he had this experience, and suddenly now he's a Christian, supposedly, quote-unquote Christian, yet he still has coins where he's paying homage to the sun god. It's truth and error, very mixed. And of course, the church authorities at the time didn't want to go back to being persecuted. They were just freed of that for 10 years. So, oh, sure, let's Sunday, yeah, that's the resurrection day. That's when Jesus resurrected. So why not? That's a Christian thing. And the rest, as they say, is history. Eventually that idea promulgated throughout the Roman Empire. And in my series, I document how Christians kept the Sabbath. In fact, it kept the Sabbath for 1,000 years. But in fact, the great schism between the two churches, one of the issues was the Sabbath. The Patriarch of Constantinople said, no, we are required to rest on the Lord's Day, on Sabbath, on the seventh day of the week, and not do any work. And the issue was that they were profane. The Roman Empire, the Western, was profaning the Sabbath by having a fast on the Sabbath. That was a tradition that was in Rome that started, again, to push people away from resting on the Sabbath. Make it a burden so that Sunday is the day you look forward to, and the festivities and so on. Because you have to remember this is about spiritual obedience. From the very beginning, so you ask me why the seventh day is important. In the very beginning, you see the story for the rest of history, which is obeying. Who do you obey? Do you obey God or do you obey the devil? That's what it's about. And so the question is, why is it important? Well, it's important because it's about who you obey. And eventually this religious system, it's not just about Sunday laws. It's about an entire religious system that's going to take over the world. And that religious system is Catholicism. That system was in power throughout Europe and Western world as the will of God on earth. Unquestioned. You could not question the Pope. You would have your head chopped off. They had indulgences to people to go kill hundreds of thousands of people they didn't agree with. Some of these people were Gnostics, like the Cathars, Albigenses. But who cares? You don't have the right to go and just slaughter them because you think you're, God's, justice on earth just to go kill. You just go preach the gospel to them. If they refuse, then God says, vengeance is mine. God will judge them.
Conversion by sword is not a godly thing?
It's not.
Yeah.
And people forget their history. And that was for over 1,000 years. And the Bible tells you that we're going back to that system where you will have to be an obedient person to this power. And if you don't obey this power in terms of other things, you'll participate in various ways. Sunday sacredness will be one of them. But Sunday sacredness, again, the devil wants to be Christ. The devil wants to be the one that you trust for your salvation, to destroy you and to mock God and to basically be worshipped as God because he's insane. He's insane.
Is he insane to the point that whatever the prophecies, prognostications of the future are in the Bible, he doesn't believe them? Or he believes them and he's just trying to win as many souls and many victories as he can? Does he know his fate, his true fate?
It's getting into the mind of the devil is, I think, impossible because he's so insanely evil. But I think that the people under him maybe have been deceived by the devil into thinking that they can win somehow.
But not him himself.
But I think the devil himself knows that he's judged. He knows he's doomed. And I think that he operates out of complete insanity and spite and evil. I think that he wants to destroy as many people as possible. I think he wants to mock God as much as possible on his way out. And I think he wants to receive worship as a way of thumbing his nose at God before he gets destroyed.
Is he like a child or a criminal who knows he could save himself? Well, okay, that's probably too much for the devil. But imagine a child going against his father's wishes, or a criminal who knows he doesn't have to do certain things, but his mind is made up, and I am all about evil, and because I won't submit, I will not submit.
Yeah, I think the devil is pride given life. Like if God could give pride life, it would be the devil. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, the devil is the villain of the story because pride is the thing that separates us from God. And that is the unfortunate outcome of being individuals with consciousness. And I think that in the Garden of Eden, the profound thing that God did through that whole experience, because again, God is omniscient. God tells you in Acts 4 that the cross was predestined. That means that every event before that was predestined, and everybody that had to be part of that event had to be, predestined. So that means that the fall in the Garden of Eden was also predestined. So then the question is, if it was predestined, what is God trying to reveal through the fall? And what he's trying to, well, not trying, but what he is revealing through that situation is that man, even given perfect circumstances, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had no history. They had no awkward teenage years. They had no parents. God was their parent. They had no diseases. They had no toxins. They had literally nothing. They're clean slate. In science, when you do an experiment, the goal is to isolate the independent variable so you can test how it moves in accordance to whatever you're doing. Obviously, because we're human, we can't always isolate the independent variable perfectly because we don't have control over everything. But God is not human. God can control everything, and he did in the Garden of Eden. So he isolated every single variable possible except one. And that variable was the Holy Spirit, because the entire point of the Bible is that you, despite your sense of yourself, that you are autonomous, you're not autonomous. God must subvert your will and you must submit to God, which is completely counterintuitive to what your senses and your experience tell you. Because your senses and your experience and your consciousness, which God has given you, tell you, no, you are like God. You can choose free of influence. And that's the devil playing.
You can choose what?
Free of influence. You can choose between good and evil. You are, self-existent. All of these things that seem true.
But doesn't submission, you say, quote, you have to submit. Doesn't that imply a degree of free will on our part and that we are free to choose?
Well, it implies that you have to make a choice and you have to experience a choice. That's true. But free will, as it is understood, posits that you can choose free of influence. The Bible doesn't tell you that you can choose free of influence, because that means you can choose free of the influence of God, and you cannot choose free of the influence of God. God tells you many times that he is completely sovereign, that we are like vessels, like crickets, like dust, like grass. There's very humbling things in the Bible about mankind, and it does not treat mankind in any way, shape, or form as a sovereign, self-determining being. That idea is from the Garden of Eden. And of course, it's been manifest through many different things, like the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, all these things throughout history. The French Revolution was all about that, about man being the self-determining creature that can determine in his life.
Sorry, can I jump in? Because
go ahead.
When you mentioned the Garden of Eden, and I think of the influence of the devil. And when you say you cannot make a choice free of the influence of God, what about, can we make a choice free of the influence of the devil?
If God causes you to be born again, yes. That is the entire point. So free will is not being able to choose free of influence. Free will, true free will, is conditional upon a relationship with God, and it is being able to choose free of the influence of evil. Because before you're born again, your life is predetermined. In other words, you're born into a cursed world with genetic issues, toxicities, ego, parents with their own issues. By the time you're even 8 years old, 9 years old, you have an ego, you have trauma responses, you're screwed, you're done. You cannot change your path because you are under the influence of the world, your flesh, and the devil and demons. And everybody's, ratio is different, I guess, at different times. But the point is, these are the influences in your life. You cannot choose free of these influences unless God sovereignly works in your life, causes you to be born again and receive a new will, which is an extension of his will.
Yeah.
And then you are free. But you're not free of his influence. In order to be free of the devil's influence, you are under God's influence. So you're always under somebody's influence. The question is, whose influence are you under?
That reminds me of the Bob Dylan song, You Gotta Serve Somebody.
You got to serve somebody, right?
Yeah.
Of course, in his case, Bob Dylan, he was talking about, the God of this world. But the point is that you cannot choose free of influence. And so in the Garden of Eden, God beautifully shows you the most controlled experiment in human history, where every single variable is accounted for. There is no way that Adam could have had an ego because he just he became, an adult. He had no parents, he had no trauma, no toxins, no, hitting your knee against the thing and crying and people making fun of you. None of that stuff. Perfect world. except one thing, which is God's Spirit. Adam and Eve were not born again, so they were not able to choose free of the influence of the devil. And that entire situation in the Garden of Eden proved for all time that despite what your senses tell you, in which of course the devil plays to because he's pride given life, you can choose free of influence. You are like God. You are so good. You can live forever. You don't need a relationship with God. It's you. You're it. You're the one. You're the center of the universe. You're the consciousness of this whole thing. That's the lie, and that's the mystery religion. And of course, God falsified that. God allowed that to happen so it could be falsified. Because if God did not decree that to happen, imagine such a thing. God creates beings that are conscious and self-aware. But there's no pain in reality. You have just a beautiful reality, whatever it is, right? You're a physical being. You have the sense of yourself. That idea would be a virus regardless. If this is the problem that God had to deal with, right? Is one of them is that in creating beings to worship him that are conscious and self-aware, you can't divorce the fact that if you're conscious, you have this sense of yourself. And of course, in a perfect world, you're going to think that you're it. You're going to think that you're God. You're the source of consciousness. That needs to be falsified. And so the devil was given life. Pride was given life. The whole history was given life. Jesus came and redeemed us for our sins. When we're in this grandiose story that A, falsifies all of the lies of the devil, and B, reveals God's mercy and justice throughout all of history. It's such a profound self-revelation of the self-existent being. And we're caught up in that. You know, God is not reacting to Adam failing and saying, oh, God, what do I do? Okay, Jesus, go and, save these people. No, God planned these things and decreed them. He decreed the villain of the story to be pride incarnate, to give pride life so that we would understand the danger of pride, because pride is the outcome of being self-aware. And so it's a profound story, and the devil, being pride itself, really being completely in love with himself, is insane. I don't think you can get in the mind of the devil, because there's even an insane criminal, I don't think is as insane as the devil. The devil is completely insane. He knows he's going to be destroyed. He knows his time is up, and he's operating out of spite. Meanwhile, the people under him are probably deceived by him, thinking, oh, look, you just worship me, you get me worship, and we can have enough conscious energy or whatever to fight Jesus when he returns, and we're going to win. He's the one who, took the world from us, and all this stuff that they believe in these occult secret societies.
Yeah.
So it's one schizophrenic world. I'm glad I'm not part of it. It's like one big club and you're not part of it with, what's his name? The comedian.
Oh yeah, Carlin.
Yeah, Carlin, George Carlin. It's one big club and you're not part of it.
Was it, I really want to move to some specific questions outside of this main issue.
For sure.
Because you wore the hat. So but there's one more thing about that. Was it difficult for you at one point to move from believing that Sunday was the day appointed for our day of rest to Saturday? Because there's no shortage of Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox preachers, theologians, experts, intellectuals who will have, there's a guy in Kalispell, Montana, who I agree with politically on so many different things, and he will rail on people who think it's Saturday, and he'll put together multiple videos too.
For sure.
So my question is kind of this: one, did you have any difficulty going from one to the other? And two, and this kind of relates to Josh's question, for me, it's kind of like, well, what about a person who's like so confused between two sides? They're hearing both issues, and they're like, I'm just going to try to get to basics and live my life based on the spirit, not the letter of the law.
Sure.
And so I am going to rest. Maybe I'm a cop and the only day I can rest is Monday or something like that. I am going to rest on some day. I'm going to respect God on this day. And then I'm going to look at different passages in the Bible, such as Romans 13, 8 through 10, or Galatians 5:14, that talk about what is the whole of the law.
Right.
The whole of the law is to love your God and to love your neighbor. In fact, the Galatians, it reduces it to only the neighbor, because in a sense, when you do love your neighbor, you're loving Jesus. And I'm at least going to have that.
Yeah.
Is it? What about a person who's just so confused Does he have to get through this and absolutely get away from this, what you would call the evil of Sunday worship?
Well, yeah, there's a lot to talk about with that. So God is merciful, and after somebody is born again, they still commit sins, right?
Yeah.
I'm not perfect. I still sin. I'm not living in sin, but I still make mistakes, and so does everybody else. So God has provided for those mistakes through Jesus, through his atonement, because his atonement is complete for all the people who are going to be saved and all the sins that they will ever commit in their life. So that's number one. Number one is that the sins that we do, and everybody has sins, are forgiven. So somebody, like I said, I've said this before, there are many well-meaning Catholics in the Catholic Church. There are well-meaning Orthodox. My mom is Orthodox. I argue with her all the time. She's very religious. She's very superstitious. She still lights a candle to a painting of Mary that she painted.
Is she? What is she? What's the name of her?
Eastern
church?
Orthodox.
Eastern Orthodox.
She's
Okay.
Eastern Orthodox.
Are they based in Greece?
Well, it's cultural. So there are
Okay.
churches they're patriarchates for different cultures. They're Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. They all have their cultural twists to the thing, but they're generally the same. The point is this, but I know that my mom is well-meaning.
Yes.
I know that my mom is well-meaning. I know that she trusts in God. I know that she's lived a new life, and even though she's deceived on certain things, I don't think you need perfect theology to be saved. I don't think you need perfect obedience to be saved. That's not what it's about. So there's that side of it. However, there's also the side of eschatology. And the eschatological landscape says, I believe,
Eschatology meaning
The
end
end
time
times.
studies.
end
Yes.
time
Okay.
studies.
Mhm.
The end times studies, given everything I've looked at, and I have a whole big end times timeline you can look at. It says, you are here, and most of everything is done. So you got a little tiny little blip, however long that's, like I said 6 to 10 years. That means that in the next decade, let's say,
6 to 10 years is your prediction, even though the Bible specifically says no one knows the hour of the day.
it does, but that is often taken out of context. The Greek there doesn't say, because here's the problem with that little statement. If we interpret it as Jesus is saying, nobody knows the time I'm returning, not even me. Not even me. Then you have a real Christological problem. Because if Jesus doesn't know when he's returning, then now you have something that the Father knows and Jesus doesn't, and they are two ontologically different beings.
Why couldn't it be in the same way that Jesus said, I'm not going to the festival, but then he ended up going to the festival?
Sure.
Why couldn't it be, I'm not divulging this to you now, and you will be in ignorance about this, but I know exactly.
He did say that. He
Okay.
did say that in the book of Acts, where the apostles were pressing him because they thought, is this the kingdom now?
It's time.
It's time now.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not for you to know the times, the seasons that the Father has appointed.
Why not the same for eschatology?
Well, because now to the second point of that, nobody knows the day or the hour. It's not nobody knows the day or the hour. The statement is actually nobody makes known the day or the hour to you.
Okay.
Only the Father makes it known. In other words, why is that important? Why is that a totally different statement? It's a totally different statement because Jesus warned about false prophets, false Christs, many deceivers.
Yeah.
And many deceivers have come since that time, proclaiming various things and saying, this is it, this is that, whatever else. And so what do these deceivers have in common? Well, an angel came to me and told me this, or, Jesus came to me. And so Jesus is telling you, not even I'm going to appear to you and tell you when is my return. Not that I don't know, but he's qualifying all of human history until his return, saying, even if you think Jesus appeared to you to tell you I'm returning on September of 2033, don't believe it, because only the Father makes it known. Well, does anybody see the Father? No, the Father makes it known through awareness. And as things get closer, we are determining and learning and seeing, and we're putting these things together. For example, in the Reformation, people understood that the papacy was the fulfillment of the Antichrist power, but they didn't understand the 1260 period. They didn't really understand the image of the beast. Certain things weren't clear because they were in the heat of the moment. They were still in the 1260 period. Now we have the luxury of a lot more history, so these things are more known. God has made these things known throughout time. So Jesus is not saying that you can't discern the time of his coming. Jesus is saying, particularly if you are loyal to the original Greek there, because Paul uses the same kind of word in another place where he's talking about the gospel, where he says, I decided to know nothing among you other than Christ crucified. He's not saying, I decided to know nothing, meaning I decided to erase my memory.
Right.
He's saying, I decided to make known nothing to you other than the simple truth of the gospel. So that is a relationship between those two things. So you combine that with other things where Jesus is telling you to be watchful, and he's given us so many different signs and different things and witnesses. And when you put all those witnesses together, like I've done in my end times prophetic timeline, it's abundantly clear that we don't have too much time left. And I think my estimate of 10 years is actually pretty conservative, to be honest with you. I really do. Because again, all the major prophecies are done. The mortal wound was healed in 1929 when the Vatican was basically created, and the Lateran Pact healed. In fact, the newspaper said healing the wound, and the papacy was restored back, and ever since then it's been growing. The 1260 period is done. The 2300 day period is done. We're in the fifth and final empire of Daniel 2. We're in the toes, really, of the empire. So all of these things are fulfilled. They're in the past. And so now we look at, okay, how close are... The only thing in my mind that I maybe could be wrong on, or I should say not wrong, but where there's give or take, is how fast are they able to implement this New World Order system? Yeah. This technocratic image of the beast situation, right, where you have a digital system of digital currency, social IDs, AI governing everything, all the government, what they're doing with Doge. Yeah. How fast are they going to do that? Are they going to take it 20 years? I don't think it's going to take them 20 years. I think it's going to take them 10 years max, because they're already doing it, and they're doing it very quickly. And it's just about shaping the culture to accept these things and make them very trendy. So I don't think we have a lot of time left. And what that means is that, going back to your question about the Sabbath, what that means is it's my job to warn people about this counterfeit religious system that is coming back into reality. Now, because I'm a monergist and I'm not a synergist, and I don't believe that the outcome is dependent on my effort, I believe that everybody who God has purposed to save and who will live through all of these things that are going to happen are going to learn the truth about the Sabbath, because that will be crucial for them not to pledge their obedience to this power when it comes back into the limelight and the world is marveling after the beast. People will learn the truth, whether it means being like the thief on the cross, where maybe they're Catholic and at the very end some of their relatives are being thrown in jail because they're not participating in the system in one way or another. They realize, like, maybe I've been wrong about this whole thing, and they start to rebel against that. Or maybe they learn it right now. They're going to learn it one way or another. Until that point in time, I'm not condemning anybody who's going to church on Sunday or resting on Sunday in that sense, because God has forgiveness for the people who he's chosen to save, even though they're doing the wrong thing. Do you get it? Like, God is merciful. It's not about perfect obedience. It's not about, which day or whatever, but it's about understanding the truth. Because in the Bible, there's only one day that is related to rest, and it's a moral command. In the New Testament, when Paul talks about the law, he uses two meanings of that word, and it has to be interpreted in terms of context. When we speak about the Mosaic law, of course, that thing is done away with. There's nothing to do with that. We don't circumcise. We don't worry about dietary laws. We don't worry about feast days. All this stuff is done away with. But the Sabbath is not part of that system, and that's a big problem that a lot of people have fallen into.
They equate it with don't worry about dates and times and feasts and moons and stuff like
Paul,
that. But it's separate.
It's separate. You have to understand, Paul, if you've read Paul, you understand that he's, first off, a very intelligent person that labors to provide context for something that he does. In Romans, the entire letter of Romans is this entire case that he builds. For what? To get to the point that, hey, the Gentiles are also saved too. They're part of the covenant, which was like so dramatic by then. Are you kidding me? The Gentiles are part of the covenant? That's an entire letter that he builds to break down this stronghold of thinking that the Jews are just the only ones that are chosen. So people who think that Colossians 2 is about the Sabbath as a moral command are sorely mistaken, because Paul, if he were to do such a thing, which he would not do, to do away with one of God's moral precepts, he would have provided massive amount of context. That verse is not about the moral command to rest on the seventh day. It's about the feast days and the Sabbaths and the fasting days and all these things that people were getting hung up with and causing division, which was a real issue in the church, especially with the Jewish conversions and things like that. So the Sabbath is a moral command. It's for your good. It's a delight. It's a delight to rest and to connect to the eternal truth of the gospel and to the future redemption that awaits our bodies every seventh day. Such a beautiful thing. I've never heard anybody actually start to practice the Sabbath and regret that they're doing it. But that Sabbath, once you learn the truth about it, and you also learn about the Antichrist power and its own counterfeit of that system, with its counterfeit Christ, the Pope is the counterfeit Christ on earth. He's a bloodless mediator for you, whereas through Christ you have a mediator that died for you, that shed his blood. And by the way, who fulfilled that by resting on the Sabbath. When God rested on the seventh day in the Genesis, in the beginning of the Bible, that was also, again, a typology. You have a dual typology, because on one side you have Adam and Eve resting with God in paradise, which is a picture of the future. Layered on top of that typology, God being there and resting with them, is Jesus Christ resting on the seventh day in redemption of mankind so that we can be in eternity forever with him. So you have the seventh day when Jesus rested in fulfillment of the creation typology, so that when we who rest on the seventh day enter into that rest every time by remembering that, okay, Jesus died for me. I'm going to connect to the gospel. I've been working all day this week. I've been stressing out, all this stuff. Let me take a break from that. Let me reconnect to the eternal truth. Let me reconnect to the fact that Jesus died for me, shed his blood, and was resting in the tomb on this day. Let me reconnect to the fact that he's going to return and we're going to live forever in a beautiful, redeemed world. What a beautiful thing to connect to every single week. And once you learn that truth, and you learn that the Antichrist has his own version of that, because that determines who you trust and who you obey, you can never look back again. So my job is to let people know about the truth. It's not about bickering over one day or another. It's about the truth versus lies. And I do believe that people who will learn the truth about this will learn. They'll learn the truth, because as this system comes to power, it begins to enforce its worship, its way of being. Then people will wake up more and more and realize that this is not right. Any Protestant who says that resting on Sunday is a way that we as Christians do not realize the preponderance of evidence, which I've documented. I have over 50 books that I've quoted from in my Lord's Day series, from Catholics and from Protestants, that document beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only did the Christian church keep the Sabbath holy as a day of resting and just keeping, you could get together with people, you could get together, go to church, have services, things like that, but they kept the honor of the Sabbath, and they had Sunday as a day of the resurrection, where you get together with believers and you go to church and you do things.
This is the early church before Constantine.
Before Constantine, and really the entire church, because the Roman idea of resting on Sunday, which is created by a pontifex, which, by the way, the Pope is the succession of the pagan pontifexes all the way going down to Babylon. That's another can of worms. But that precedent was set by the pontifex, acting as a pagan pontifex. So when you obey the command to rest on Sunday, you are not obeying a biblical command. You're obeying a command by a pagan king, who, by the way, the devil gave his throne and power and great authority to. So you are obeying a counterfeit authority, because it is who you obey that determines everything. And at the end of time, when this system is in its power and its heyday, and people are marveling after the beast and participating in the system and saying, oh my gosh, it's so great, and you choose to be different, you're going to be called, just like they called them in the 4th century, a Jew, a Judaizer, a legalist, demon-possessed, whatever else they're going to call you, for resisting the will of God. And all of the stuff that's happening with Zionism right now is a perfect precedent for that future reality. So this is what it's about. And again, I'm not condemning anybody who's ignorant right now and resting on Sunday because they think they're honoring God. I'm not condemning that, but they will learn the truth. The people who need to learn, they need to learn the truth, because the Catholics will tell you, and they're very right, there is no biblical precedent for resting on Sunday. When you rest on Sunday, you are obeying the word of the papacy and the tradition of the Catholic Church. There is no biblical precedent for resting on Sunday.
Oh, but they can get away with it because
they don't believe
church teaching can trump biblical precedent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For them, they don't believe that the word of God is supreme. For them, it's, well, there's tradition and then there's the word of God and, whatever we want to do.
Is that similar to Judaism?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. The Jews of today, unless you're like a Karaite Jew and you just go with the Torah or whatever they do, they have 50,000 books. the Zohar, the Kabbalah, the this and that, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the commentaries of this rabbi that way. Well, what does he think? Well, how about what does God say? Dang it.
And all these came out of the learned rabbis in the synagogue. And so you could also say that the Catholic Church, whatever they're teaching, Catholic canon comes out of...
It's the word of man. It's the successive word of the popes, which is the tree of knowledge. It is knowledge. It's not blood. When you rest on the seventh day, because God told you to rest on the seventh day, because he rested on the seventh day intentionally, because Jesus would end up resting on the seventh day in the tomb for you, because he died for you. And that's a very intentional thing that God does, so that when you do that physically, you show who you obey and you rest in that truth. You are connecting to something that actually happened, which is life. Jesus died and he was bloodied in the tomb. The seventh day was consecrated by blood, just like the Passover, how they had their lambs. And I think, actually, believe it or not, I think that was on the seventh day too, when the destroyer passed over Egypt, which is very interesting. But anyway, but then you have something like Sunday, which is a complete conjecture. Look, it doesn't matter if you go to church on Sunday. I'm not against people going to church. You can go to church any day of the week. It's about resting and transferring the sabbatical command to a different day. The Sabbath is a moral commandment. It is not, the Catholics actually agree with me on this. Any Catholic will tell you, if they're a good Catholic, they will tell you that the 10 Commandments are binding on the Christian. You cannot be a Christian and say, oh, well, now I can kill and steal and do whatever I want. You must obey the moral code to show fruits of your faith.
Except in the 10 Commandments, as I saw in your video, they changed the Sabbath day wording to the Lord's Day.
They changed a lot of things. So they got rid of the second commandment on idols.
Right.
Because that's a real problem. So then you only got 9, so we got to make 10 again. So they split up the last one into 2. And so in the one on coveting, they split it into don't cover your neighbor's wife, don't cover your neighbor's goods. It's not 2 commandments, it's 1. But anyway, they have very clever semantics that they go about that. And then they changed the Sabbath command to the Lord's Day. And of course, the Lord's Day, according to the Bible, Isaiah 58, 13 to 14, that's the only time where in the Bible it tells you that the Lord's Day is the 7th day. That's my special day. There's no other Lord's Day. But of course, the Catholic Church, through a lot of surreptitious propaganda and a lot of dialectics through many thousands of years, the last 2,000 years, has convinced people into thinking that the Lord's Day is Sunday, which is not. The Lord's Day is the 7th day. And it was and always will be the 7th day, because that is the only day that God says, this is my day.
Okay.
And John, when he was writing the book of Revelation, wasn't in the Spirit on Sunday, because by then, it was depends what you believe the book of Revelation was written, but let's say it was written in the 90 AD or something like that. By then, first off, John was a Quartodecimans, and that's a whole thing with people celebrating Passover, celebrating the resurrection on Passover. And so there's a lot of documentation on that, which means that they were also celebrating the Sabbath, because we know from his disciples, like Polycarp, that Polycarp was keeping the Sabbath. And all the early Christians were Jews. And the Jews are not going to suddenly say, oh, we're free from this. The thing that defined us as Jews and loyal to God, that we found rest in God, we're going to stop doing that now. We're going to just, now that we're in Jesus, we don't have to obey these laws anymore. It's nonsense. But again, the issue with the early church was figuring out, how do we distinguish ourselves from the Jews? Because the Jews who rejected Jesus were being very legalistic about the Sabbath.
Right.
They were burdening the Sabbath. We want to be like these Jews, and that was the real problem, especially because the Jews were starting to get persecuted by the Roman Empire. So we don't want to look like we're Jews.
And you're saying all this is going to be repeated. It's going to be
all of this.
Everything about Saturday worship is going to be associated with Jewry, Judaizing, and that's what's going to get the church to make it a general rule.
The devil used the Jews in the beginning to push people away from the Sabbath, and he'll do it again at the end. In the very beginning, he used the Jews by baiting them into 2 ways, either to the right or to the left. It's always about 2 ways, because the devil's a master of duality. He baited them into legalism, or he baited them into gluttony. The Jews were just being total hypocrites some of them were being total hypocrites on the Sabbath, and partying, having whatever the heck they were doing, not being godly at all.
Yep.
And so the early Christians were like, we don't want to be like these Jews. We don't want to be legalists. And look how hypocrites they are. This is not how we should keep this out. But we do have to keep the 10 commandments, and one of them is the Sabbath. So how do we keep the commandment without being like the Jews? That was the issue for the first 100, 200 years. especially with the Roman persecutions, because they didn't want to be like, identifying themselves as Jews. And then you also had the Gnosticism, which was basically very popular at the time, started with Marcion, and probably even earlier than that. But, they were Gnostic Christians who were redefining the Bible and saying all these counterfeit gospels, like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, all these counterfeit gospels they're going out into the world. Satan was very busy. As soon as the cross happened, he was extremely busy with counterfeit letters, counterfeit, salvations and all kinds of things like that. And he was pushing on Christians from either side. You had on one side, you had the Romans pushing and persecuting and killing people. On the other side, you had the Jews persecuting the Christians and being hypocrites and making the Christians hate the Jews and distance themselves from the Jews. Then you had the Gnostics who were saying, oh, well, this is great. And pretty soon that influenced a lot of people like Clement of Alexandria and, Justin Martyr and all these people who were very Gnostic in their thinking, in the sense that, oh, well, actually the Sabbath is spiritual. And, a lot of people love this stuff today. Oh, the Sabbath is spiritual. And every day is my Sabbath. And,
I've heard that.
And Sunday is actually because of the 8th day and it's the resurrection. And that's when so much poetry, but really the Bible is very clear. It's a very literal command. There's no spiritual typological command. It's you must rest on the 7th day, because when you align with the pattern of the Creator, you are showing physically that you obey who you are obeying. When you align with the pattern of the Pontifex, then you are showing physically that you are obeying the counterfeit authority on earth. And God has determined and decreed this to happen to test his elect. That's why the people who, like I said, I'm not worried, because the people who are going to learn about this will learn the truth. As these things get worse and worse, as Project 2025 starts coming to the forefront, Opus Dei, as they start passing Sunday laws, this is going to happen within the next 10 years. You'll see it. As the Jews start converting, you're going to see charismatic conversions from the Muslim world into Protestant Christianity, and Protestant Christianity is going to merge into Catholicism, basically, because they're practically there. All these things are going to come to a head, and Sunday sacredness will come more and more to the forefront. Now people are listening on Hallow, the Hallow app, the Catholic app that everybody listens to. You have Catholic people converting to Catholicism, and you have a Catholic Supreme Court. You have Catholics all over Trump. America is more Catholic now than it has ever been. And the founding fathers, if they knew this, they would be rolling in their graves.
Do you think the Catholic influence on Trump is greater than the Jewish influence on Trump?
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because on one side you think, how do these things work together, do they? Because on one side you got the Catholics, and on one side you got the Jews. One of these sides is gonna, lose, because, they're very the Catholics hate the Jews. They've hated the Jews, since the beginning. So it's ultimately a ruse, because the people who are in these positions, you have to remember that it's all about secret societies. The CIA, the FBI was started by Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus members. All these people were Knights of Malta, secret society members. Opus Dei is all around Trump. Trump went to a Jesuit university. He's, very friendly with these people. The people around him are, Jesuits and Jesuit trained. Are there Jews in his cabinet? Yes, there are. And the question is, what is Trump doing with them? Well, one avenue that is very likely, because if you look, you can only understand things if you look through history. History gives you perspective. Otherwise, the devil hides through his many little schemes that he's doing. The devil has done what he's doing with Trump several times. He did it once with Napoleon, and he did it once with Hitler. And now Trump is strike 3. So what happened with Napoleon? A lot of people don't know this, but Napoleon was the one to liberalize the Jews in Europe. He was the one to liberalize the Jews. And there's a famous engraving or picture of Napoleon with his foot on a rock, and he's like pointing this way and towards the light. And there's this pyramid. There's this pyramid with a one eye on it, and light coming out of the one eye, of course, is a very well-known symbol these days. And the Jews are going, oh my gosh, yes, there's our Messiah. So the Jesuits know, because they're agents of the devil, they know exactly how to manipulate people. On one hand, you have desire. On one hand, you have fear. What do the Jews want? What have they wanted since Jesus, since before Jesus? What do they want?
Shekels?
Yeah. They wanted their national identity. They wanted to have their fleshly Messiah. They wanted to have their physical redemption.
Yep.
Yeah.
They wanted to be like Solomon's empire again and be, from the river to the sea. The Jews have always lusted after that. But the Jews were kicked out of many countries. They were kicked out of a lot of countries for all their shenanigans. Everybody hated the Jews. So for 1,500 years, there was no precedent for the Jews to have any nationalism at all. Nobody in Europe would have ever thought, oh, the Jews are going to be having a nation again. Nobody in history would have ever thought such a stupid thing. But the Jesuits had to change that because of all the eschatological issues that I outlined previously. So Napoleon, being, a Jesuit puppet, one of his roles was to liberalize the Jews. And in fact, he's recorded as saying that he was ready to start, when he was ready to invade Palestine, he was ready to build a third temple. If I take over Palestine, I shall see it fit to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. So the Zionist agenda that the Jesuits are doing now was begun in late 1700s, early 1800s with Napoleon. It failed because at that point, when Napoleon went to Palestine, he was stopped by the British Freemasons. That was a real trouble because you got to remember, Satan's world doesn't work by mutual cooperation. Satan's world works by everybody has a knife to each other's throat. So you have these competing factions that need to all be reined in under the beast, eventually. And so that was a real problem. So what happened over the course of 150 years after that was, through the Rothschilds, through the central banking schemes that they've done, through wars, through revolutions, they subverted every country. And eventually, by the time you had the 1900s, the British were ready to play ball. And you had the Balfour Agreement, you had, everything that started the State of Israel. So they wanted to do that with Napoleon, but they failed. And then when you had the State of Israel, everybody was already under Jesuit control. Hitler was he was a half Rothschild, or quarter Rothschild, I forget anyway. He's Rothschild, part Rothschild. And he loved the Jesuits. He modeled his SS after the Jesuits. The Pope loved Hitler. And you had basically the Jesuits playing both sides because they helped the Bolsheviks come to power in communism. And this was basically a trial run for the image of the beast. What the Nazis did with their Third Reich and their millennial reign that they wanted to do, Hitler was in love with this idea of like a Catholic, New World Order, basically. I mean, that's what he was primed to do. And of course, he failed.
Did he see himself as a successor to Napoleon and try the same thing that that Napoleon failed to do?
That's a good question.
The Third Temple stuff.
I don't know if he wasn't about the Third Temple, but he was instrumental in creating a state of Israel. He facilitated through the Havara Agreement, tens of thousands of Jews to move out of Germany and to basically go and settle there.
And until the war really ramped up, that was a Nazi.
You had a coin with a Nazi swastika and a 6-pointed star on the other one. And a dual minted coin, which tells you everything. So all these things are just delusions. And of course, the Holocaust was a hoax. Sure, some people died in the concentration camps, but it's not what you've been told. But the powers that be, okay, who's going to win? Oh, okay, these guys won. All right, let's play the narrative this way. And this is what's happened. And so now Trump is the third in line. And so he is surrounded by Jews, but he's also surrounded by Catholics. And so one of those groups is not going to win. And the Bible tells you that the devil gave his throne and power to the papacy. That means the Jews are going to be the ones that are going to be out of luck. But Trump is really playing to their desires for a Messiah. He's on that coin with the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, I've seen it in a church.
The whole fake assassination attempt, where his left ear was pierced. Now all the rabbinic Jews are like, oh, look, this is from Leviticus, where he's a servant now, and all this stuff.
He fell down. They cut his ear with something.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Or they just put some schmutz on there and whatever else. It was just so fake, and just. Perfect timing, too. Perfect timing with the Republican National Convention and everything else. I mean, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay.
Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, really. And a perfect picture, too. The guy who took the picture was the same guy who took the pictures for 9/11 with Bush and everything. It's literally like...
Really?
Yeah, it's the same photographer, same dude. Same, guy who's like perfectly there at the right moment for him to be like fist bump and they can put it on the t-shirt and everything. I'm like, come on, man. So fake, So anyway, but Trump is really playing to the Jews. Because, these people are very duplicitous in nature. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's a double agent in the sense that, he's playing to the Jews. And it's hard to know, too, because all these people like Netanyahu is, first off, not a Jew, but he's also a secret society member. All these people are like devil worshippers. They're all worshiping in their own little cults and ranks and different things. And so what you see on the front is Jew, Catholic, this and that, Protestant, but really in the background, they're all just satanic. They're all worshiping the same thing. And the satanic religion operates by duality. they have the opposers and they have the redeemers. They have the good cops and the bad cops.
Yes.
So Satan, if Satan wants to be God, he has basically had to recreate what God has in order to present himself as the savior. So God, in the actual reality, you had God as the Elohim, the God of gods, and then you had the other Elohim, and then you had the accuser, Satan, who was in the court. Of course, Satan is kicked out now as of the cross, but nevertheless, that was the original plan, was Satan was the accuser in the court. Well, in order for Satan to be God, he has to create a counterfeit accuser. He has to create a counterfeit Satan. And that's what I mean when I say that Zionism, communism, Islam, all these obviously dark things, they're just counterfeit devils that the devil is using through his chosen vehicle of false light, which is Catholicism, to ultimately conquer and to bring people back to the Catholic social ideal, which is the perfect balance between communism and capitalism. It's the one that solves all your problems, the one that gives you a little property, the one that gives you your time back on Sundays with your family, because you can spend time with your family and have all this, family time. You like your family, don't you? You don't want to work 7 days a week.
Is that the one that will abolish usury?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, they may do that just to give people the idea that, oh my gosh, we finally made it to the golden age. Now we have this equity and everything's fair again. You just got to sign on the dotted line and be part of the system. But I wouldn't put it past them. This is going to be. Look, when the Bible says the world will marvel after the beast,
It'll be attractive.
Exactly. If it's a Zionist Noahide law, obvious evil, rabbinic, whatever, everybody can point and go, look, that's evil.
That's not going to charm us.
That's not going to charm you.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
The devil appears as an angel of light.
Yeah.
He appears as Jesus Christ. And in fact, if you look at all of the false prophets of Islam, Muhammad, Constantine, Ellen White, Joseph Smith, Ignatius of Loyola, the one who started the Jesuits, they all had the same thing in common. What do they see? A bright light, an angel of light. Ignatius even saw a serpent that was very shimmering and shiny.
Did Mary Baker Eddy see that too?
Yeah, or all of these Marian apparitions, which, by the way, appeared on the Sabbath, so that the Sabbath now became the day to devote to Mary. So after the 1,000 years that Satan was done blaspheming God and making people fast on the Sabbath and making that a burden, then you start seeing Marian apparitions appearing. Mary starts to appear to people, and she always appears on the Sabbath for some reason. Eventually, they started to consecrate the seventh day to Mary. So not only is Satan not content with being worshipped, he also wants to blaspheme God as much as possible. So he has turned the seventh day in Catholicism to the day of Mary, where people are idolatrizing, that's a word, being idolatrous with their worship of this creature. And then Sunday is the counterfeit day of worship, where you're paying your homage and obedience to the papacy, the one who gives you rest. This is what it's come down to: the tree of life or the tree of knowledge. And at the end of the end, people will learn the truth, and they will choose life, even though it's going to come at worldly costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're getting near the end, I think, but the man that introduced me to your podcast, to your videos, to everything, he sent me some questions. I wonder if we can hit him real quick.
Let's go. Sure.
Okay. There's a few. So it's hard to get people to answer in a short answer, but there's going to be like 5 or 6. Okay, good. Are you familiar with Leo Tolstoy's conceptions on the doctrinal theory of Christ?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit.
Okay.
Tolstoy, was that in the 1900s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Early. Probably late 1800s.
Yeah, he had some like religious things. Not super familiar, but from what I've read about it, it was very. Wasn't he the one that said, if Jesus came back now, he would be shocked or something like that about the church or something like that? I forget. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. Anyway, no, not so much.
Okay,
not so
let's
much.
move on.
Yeah.
And my friend is an absolute anti-statist. He does not like the government. He says, can Christians who participate in the state and its myriad satanic machinations claim to serve only one master?
That's a good question. I think the higher you go in the state, you're going to have to choose.
Right.
I don't think it's wrong for Christians to want to get involved in their local governments. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's misguided to think that we can bring the kingdom of earth or kingdom of heaven on earth by being involved in government and Christianizing the world, which is what is very common now with Christian nationalism. I think that's misguided. And it's also misguided to think that you can serve only one master the higher you go. If you're in the Senate, if you're in, very high positions of power, you're compromised.
Nobody gets there without being fed.
Exactly. You're not, you get there and you're blackmailed. So no,
Okay.
I don't think you can.
You're probably going to understand this question better than me. Did Paulianity become Constantinianity, and then supplant Christianity under the Vatican?
I reject the idea of Paulianity because Paul, I have a whole video on this. Paul is completely consistent with Jesus' teachings on all the major things, whether it's salvation, the end times, the Sabbath, justification. Paul is completely consistent. That's number one. So if you compare word to word on all the major teachings, he's completely consistent. Number two, Peter endorses Paul as a beloved brother. So if you're going to say that Paul was a false apostle and whatever his teachings are false, you're not being honest with the evidence. And also, you have to discredit Peter as a genuine
Father
apostle.
of the church.
Exactly. So Peter is basically saying that Paul is a brother, and you're saying that Paul is a false apostle. So whose testimony is true? So Paulianity is a term that is very common in legalist sects, like Torah keepers, Hebrew roots, sacred name type of people, who basically have this idea that Paul was the usurper and he's like a Roman plant. I'm just like, do you read how much Paul suffered for the gospel, and you read his words? Do you get the sense that he's a deceiver? I mean, he's completely consistent with Jesus. And Paul's writings are some of the most encouraging in the gospel, in the sense because he writes a lot about enduring and having eternal security. And of course, the devil wants to accuse Paul and to make Paul look discredited to people with Paulianity. So I reject Paulianity. I don't think Paul supplanted Christianity. Constantine, on the other hand, did. And that was not just Constantine, it was a series of events leading up to Constantine, which I document in my Lord's Day series. But Constantine was definitely a major inflection point. Because what did Constantine do? He relieved the pressure on the Christians. If there's pressure, you go to Christ. Because you realize, oh man, I'm dying. I'm getting persecuted. I'm getting crucified. Where's my hope?
It's like the rock bottom thing we talked about earlier.
Rock bottom. But if the devil could say, no, it's okay. Come on in. It's going to be great. We're going to have all these comforts. We're not
What
going to
everybody else is doing.
We're not going to persecute you. It's going to be great. But you know what? Let's just do things like this, a little bit like that, and then compromise here and there, and then nobody knows the wiser. So yeah, Constantine was definitely an inflection point. The Orthodox and the Catholics think that he was a hero, but that's not what I believe.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Holocaustianity and the worship of the Jews of Israel as the Redeemer? I can guess.
Yeah, I think the Holocaust was a hoax.
Okay.
I do think some people died, obviously, because there were concentration camps. But the United States had concentration camps for the Japanese. So it was a common practice for war to put people who were in danger of basically causing a revolution in a sequestered situation.
We had them in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Britain had them in the Boer War.
Yeah, it's a common practice. So yes, did people die? Most of them died because of typhoid. So anyway, there's a lot to go into that. But the Holocaust was a hoax. I think it was just designed to push the Jesuit dispensational Zionist narrative. Of course, that's collapsing now. So I'm glad that it's collapsing. But at the same time, my goal is to help rescue people that are getting their cognitive dissonance, blasted with all these things that are happening and going from dispensationalism to Catholicism.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? The Catholics are right. Look at these dirty Jews.
Right.
Oh, the religion was right. I hate my Protestant background.
Yep.
That's what I'm trying to help people avoid.
Okay, a question I came up with watching one of your videos. I think you said that Hollywood was owned by the Jesuits.
Yeah.
What about the Catholic Legion of Decency when supposedly they took over, where the Protestants dropped the ball in terms of controlling Hollywood and keeping obscenity out of Hollywood, and this Catholic Legion of Decency that tried to put a chain on Hollywood for all these years and keep sex out of films and pornography and that stuff. Wasn't that a Catholic operation?
It was, and a lot of people don't realize that just like communism, with theaters, the Jesuits were the ones who first off invented and perfected the projection system on a wall. From the camera obscura, the Jesuits were the ones who perfected that. And they're also the ones who perfected theaters and plays in Europe for hundreds of years through William Shakespeare, who was obviously a fraud. He's just, a compilation of different writings from different people, and Francis Bacon and everything else. But they ripped writings off and they basically made this entire thing and shaping the culture. So Hollywood, when it was started, yes, were there Freemasons, were there Jews? Yeah, of course, you get the usual mixed bag. But the Jesuits, there's a book called Jesuit Hollywood, which documents this quite a bit. The Jesuits were very much in control of that operation because the Jesuits were shaping culture with that operation. Then it turned liberal to match Zionism, the liberal world order after World War II. It went dark, but now that's coming to light. A lot of these celebrities are getting exposed. A lot of them are converting. A lot of them are coming back to their traditional values. And pretty soon you're going to see, like right now, was it Mel Gibson and what's his name?
Caviezel?
No, maybe it's Caviezel, but I think it's this other producer.
Actor? Oh, producer, okay.
Anyway, he's a Catholic producer, but Trump appointed them to be like their ambassadors for Hollywood and to reshape Hollywood. So Hollywood is destined to be reined back into the system where you're going to start seeing movies that are religious. You're going to see
Wholesome.
Wholesome, exactly. Oh my gosh, and family time and family. What is the family for?
They're going to bring back the Waltons.
Yeah, you're going to see that. And it's crazy because the young people, especially, who have been robbed of so much essence, they're starving for purpose. This young generation, they're hungry for traditional values. They're hungry for tradition. So this is what the Jesuits have done. When the Reformation was started, it was started on the basis of principle that tradition is dead, that the living word is the scriptures. And when you are connected to that word, you have life. Tradition is dead because it has no substance. It has the illusion of substance. That was what the Reformation was fought over. And now we are 500 years after that situation, and people are so devoid of substance that they now see these grandiose religious parades and idolatrous parades and statues and, oh my gosh, these little rites and pilgrimages and everything. Oh, there's so much substance.
Yes.
That's how devoid of any substance people are, that they have come to the point where now religion looks so attractive.
They're being wowed.
They're being wowed, exactly. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So, especially with the young people. So, yeah, anyway, I forgot what the question was, but
No, I think you answered it. Okay,
Yeah.
Tudor Alexander. Thank you. We did a long one. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your
That's
time.
great.
Thanks
Yeah.
for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep. Thanks.
absolutely.
Super insightful.
Yeah.